Hello, dear viewers. Support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it. And also, make sure you comment your thought. Now let's start the video. Aemon, I don't like this. Azir Thorn did not sound like a happy man as they rode through the tunnel. I know that it has to be done, but that doesn't mean that I have to like it. Aemon smiled thinly. At least Thorn was a man who stated his mind clearly, and at least he was speaking his mind in the tunnel and not in the midst of the wildling camp. None of us like it, Corgier and Halfhand muttered. Benjen Stark had summoned him to Castle Black before his departure for the south, and the old ranger had been deeply shaken by his first sight of the head of the White. Doesn't feel right. Has to be done, though, the Lord Commander grunted. With the others coming with an army of Whites, we can't risk their numbers growing any further. This must be done, and based on what we've heard about the old days, this war with the wildlings is something that our ancestors would never have wanted. Various grunts greeted this pronouncement, and then they rode on, out of the tunnel and out into the open air. It was a fine day, he could tell by the lack of snow and by the very faint warmth on his face from the sun. On they rode, with the riders to each side of him warning him about the ground ahead, into the haunted forest where the ground was thick with old fallen leaves and pine cones. After a while, they reined in. Company, Heward muttered. Wildlings. We are here as arranged, Jer Mormont called out. We are here to parley. Amun heard the sound of feet in the leaves ahead. Aye, said a voice. We are here to take you to Mancerator. Under terms of parley, will not harm you. As if you could lay a fucking finger on us, Azir Thorn muttered too softly for anyone but Aemon to hear him. Gods, but this is ironic. Lead on, the Lord Commander commanded, and on they went. From the sound of it, there were more wildlings in the trees, and Aemon sighed a little. A flight of arrows, and they'd be all dead, and the Night's Watch would be headless. Deeper into the forest they went, and then he smelt the first wisps of smoke. Somewhere ahead of them was an encampment. When he heard the words, "There's a lot of the buggers," from hearing he knew that he was right. As they approached the encampment, he heard the sound of rising voices. The wildlings were gathering, and by the sound of some of their voices there was some confusion in the air. That's the oldest man I've ever seen, he heard one say. A girl with a very northern accent, and his eyes, what's wrong with his eyes? He turned in her direction. They no longer work, young woman, but my other senses have adapted to their loss. How did he, what good is a blind black crow? He's the maester of Castle Black, Ygritte, and he's worthy of a great deal of respect. Maester Aemon, I am glad to see you looking so well. The voice was a familiar one. Mancerator, it has been many years since we last met. I believe that I still had my sight then. A cough of discomfort. I am heartily sad that you lost the use of your eyes. I remember how much you loved to read. There was a cough to one side. Mance.
Curran.
Of course. The two had once been friends, and the old bear himself, as well as Sir Thorn. Welcome all. No Benjen Stark, though. Raider, the old bear sounded curt. We must speak. Aye, we must. There are some you need to meet as well. There was a pause as if he was looking about. Here. These are Tormund Giantsbane, and the Lord of Bones, also known as Rattleshirt. The introductions were punctuated by the sound of raucous sniffs from one side, and what sounded like bone grinding on bone from the other. And we will talk in my tent. From the smell of the tent that he was gently guided to its construction must have required a lot of seal fat. Oh, and skins that had been cured, very likely by an expert. He was escorted to a chair made from wood. After a few moments, a goblet of some kind was placed into his hands. There you go, Maester Aemon, said Raider kindly. Something warm for you. My wife swears by it. It's got 5 types of herbs, and I think 1 moss. Good for you, though. My thanks, Aemon replied softly before taking a sip. It was indeed delicious. Thank her for me, please. So, you have a wife now, Sir Lezer said sourly. When you broke your oath, you didn't do it by halves, did you? There was a slight pause and then a scrape of a chair as if someone had seated themselves in it rather firmly. I did what I thought was right at the time, Raider said in a voice that sounded as if he was trying to be very patient. As I do now, I went south weeks ago to meet with Lord Stark. After I heard the call, I know now that he knows of the full danger that we all face. Another short silence. Corran broke it. You ask why no Benjen Stark. He's heading south as we speak, bearing the head of a White, a present for the lords of Westeros. He must be on a bloody fast horse, then. It's still full summer down south, and a white's head will rot fast there. Faster as he reaches places like Dorne. Eamon said dryly. Fortunately, our ancestors were wiser than us in that regard. We have been making discoveries in Castle Black. Amidst other places, and one of those discoveries was a set of cages large enough to hold the hand or the head of a white. Apparently they slow decay. They were made by the first men. I have one here, Jartir and Mormont rumbled. Amon could hear folds of cloth being disturbed and then sound of a cage being placed on a wooden surface. Benjen Stark found the first up near the Fist of the First Men at a long hidden place called Overlook. So that's what he was there for, Matt said. There was a scrape as he presumably picked the cage up. Tormund, you said that your scouts had seen him near there. Aye, said a new voice, presumably that of Tormund. They said he was wandering about there, said that he met the Wanderer there as well. He was looking for whites there. The old bear rumbled. He found them thanks to this Wanderer, Cold Hands, he calls himself. There's a tale there. He was once a Stark. He's hundreds of years old, at least. Benjen said that he had some kind of duty or task. Our people have always known about him, muttered Tormund. He wanders the haunted forest, rides an elk. We were always told never to bother him. Don't know why. That cage, I've seen one of those before, said a new voice. Up near Hardhome, in one of the caves. Broken, though. Is that so, Rattleshirt? Raider sounded like a man thinking deeply. Damn it. I wish I would have known of these before. I could have taken one with me to Winterfell. How far south are they spreading? Sir Otsley barked. In what numbers? And how many others are there? What do your scouts say? Raider sighed. We avoid them. If we have to observe them, it's from a distance. No one in their right mind goes anywhere near them. Thorn. Not if they want to live to report back. I did not know that your people were such faint-hearts, Sir Olazir said with more than a note of scorn in his voice. Surely you observe the enemy? The enemy can lie under your fucking feet and rise from the snow and choke the life out of you before you know it. Tormund roared, What do you know of whites, Southerner? Real whites, not heads in cages. Shambling men and women with faces that you once knew. Could you kill a friend who had been turned? Could you? I have. You know nothing. Enough? Atman roared the word with a savagery that surprised him. Enough! There is too much at stake for us to start to squabble like children. Mistakes have been made in the past. We know from our records now that once the wildlings, the free folk as you call yourselves, acted as scouts for the Night's Watch in the days just after the building of the wall, that once we were united in fighting against the others, those days must return, if we are to stand a chance in the war that is to come. We all know the stakes. We must allow you, South, so that your people do not add to the army of whites that the others have assembled. That for the wildlings it is a matter of flight, or a fate worse than death. A rather embarrassed pause followed. Your pardon, Master Ammon, Sir Eliezer muttered, eventually. I was just... We need information, and my people need to get south of the wall, Raider said quietly. The others are pressing southwards with every day that passes. The free folk need to escape them. We need your tunnel at Castle Black. You'll need more than our tunnel, the Lord Commander answered. How many of your folk are coming south? I can call on 100,000. I heard that you mentioned that number before, but how long would it take your 100,000 to pass through the one tunnel at Castle Black? The pause that followed was longer than the last one. That's a very good point, Raider said, eventually. Add on the giants and their mammoths. It would be a bit tight. How many giants have you got? Corin asked. More than we had a month ago. Their numbers doubled when a group came in from the Frostfangs. A short silence. They brought something surprising. Someone surprising. A child of the forest. Outerman felt his jaw drop in shock. Truly, he asked the word with more than a hint of squeakiness in his voice. A child of the forest? I thought that even you wildlings had lost sight of them. We had, Tormund almost whispered. Almost shat myself when I saw that face. Heartstring, that was its name, had a warning for us. It said that the enemy, the others presumably, were preparing something by the sea south of the Frostfangs, Raider said quietly. Also said something odd. Said that Tormund and I had to go to the Knight's Fort. We have to help a man through a hidden gate there, with two others, a man with a golden mind and a boy who died and fell through time. Something about fixing the links between magic north and south of the wall. Shock rippled through him. Robb Stark. They were talking about Robb Stark, and now he was on very dangerous ground. The news of what had happened to that boy was restricted to just Benjen Stark and himself at Castle Black. Ned Stark had insisted on that. He needed to talk to Stark about that. The old bear needed to know. There is indeed a hidden gate at the Night Fort, the Black Gate, he said quietly. Few, it seems, know of it. As for the other two men, this has the sound of prophecy. And such things are dangerous. Prophecies are never what they seem to be. I must think about this, think very deeply about this. What else did this child of the forest say? It seemed to be delighted that Ned Stark holds the Fist of Winter, which got the son of the Thenn very excited. The Thenn are coming south. All of them. All of them? Now it was Kieran's turn to sound astonished. I thought that they'd never leave that valley of theirs. The Stark holds the fist, so he commands them now. That's what they said. Yet another brief silence. Well now, that should make life interesting, Sir Adair said dryly. Ned Stark with a small army of Thenns at his beck and call. Something happening, Raider said quietly. Something very old is waking up, and there are powers involved that both awe and frighten me. All of us feel the same, Jer Mormont muttered. Then he sighed. Right then, Lord Stark is on his way to Castle Black, where he has summoned the Lords of the North. He will explain to them what he has ordered, as he has written to me to request. You are to be allowed south of the wall and into the gift and the new gift. We have men out now working out where you are to go. Let me make some things very clear. No raiding is to be allowed. No rape. No murder. No thieving. A long winter is coming, and we will need everything we can get our hands on in terms of food grown and preserved. Things are different, south of the wall. Ways are different. I'll not lie to you. It'll be hard. Hunting will be a bit different for a start. And as for growing crops, have any of your people grown wheat or barley? Oats even? Some, Mads replied. You'd be surprised what can be grown in some places north of the wall. We've been doing it for thousands of years. But I take your point. When can we start coming through the tunnel at Castle Black? There was a rasping noise that meant that Jerrier Mormont was rubbing his beard with one calloused hand. In a few days' time, we need to open up the other tunnels and gates in the nearest forts on the wall. Deep Lake, Queen's Gate, and Oakenshield are at least half-manned now, and in decent repair. That'll make 4 tunnels. And on the Knight's Fort with this mysterious Black Gate, and that will be 5, with Eastwatch by the Sea and the Shadow Tower as well. That makes 7. And we'll try to open a few more. Some of our people are at Hardhome as well. If ships could be sent there, then that would make passage south easier. I'll have Cotterpike send some ships there. He has quite a few these days. A lot of volunteers for the wall have arrived since the call went out. A lot of help. Your pardon, Lord Commander. Ammon broke in. Master Rattleshirt. You said that Hardhome had the remains of a cage. Could there be more there? Maybe, came the reluctant answer. Hardhome has been a ruin since the night it burnt. No one knows how or why to this day. There might be some more cages in the caves. It's a cursed place. There are bones everywhere in some places. Why do you need more cages? We know so little about them, Ammon mused. Not even what metal they were made from, just that they were made. The more we have, the more proof we can send south that weights exist. Even the smallest proof might help. Well then, Raider said, with a certain grim satisfaction, if you need the heads of whites to take back with you, I believe that we have 3 at least. My Lord of Bones here struck the heads off a group of 3 whites 2 days ago. I had him keep them just in case, for this meeting, in case you needed proof. You can send them south now. That should convince even a Dornishman. Cyrilla. Father would be annoyed at first at her change to their plan, but after he got her letter, he'd understand. She thought as she looked across the railing at the trees on the far coast to the west. They were clawing northwards using quite a bit of sail, and she hoped that the captain knew his business. He said that he did, and the fact that he happened to be of the salty Dornish meant that she took him at his word. They were certainly flying along. She'd been quite intrigued by her mission when Father had told her about it. The more she traveled north, the more that intrigue deepened into something else. She had met so many people, all talking about the same thing, in so many different harbors. The call had been sent out. The others were coming. The Stark had called for aid. They had to do something to help out. What had sparked this? The fact that some, but not all, of the houses of the Stony Dornish had also heard this call was interesting. It implied that those who had heard the call had the blood of the first men in them, which made sense based on the legends. The first men had fought the others. Therefore, it made sense that their descendants would hear this call. The problem was that surely the others were legends. Well, she had to keep an open mind, and that was what Father had stressed, to find out what was going on, to absorb as much information as possible, and then send it all back to him. She was to get to Winterfell as fast as possible. But she wasn't at Winterfell. She had started off heading for White Harbor, but after a few days she noticed that 2 of the passengers were not what they seemed to be. They appeared to be a pair of merchants from the Summer Isles. They were not, though, the boy. Oh, he had Summer Isles blood. She could tell just by looking at him, but it was mixed with something else. He was a grave boy, serious and dutiful. When he smiled, it almost came as a surprise. The other man was the reason why she had changed her destination, which was now to wherever the 7 hells they were now eventually headed. She had recognized him at once. Father had made all of her sisters memorize the faces of every Lannister in the main line at Casterly Rock. This one had come as a surprise, though, as he was supposed to be dead. Tyrion Lannister was supposed to have sailed into the smoking sea of Valyria years before and then vanished without a trace, just as so many others had also done the same. Uncle Doran had banned Dornishmen from trying to get to Valyria. It was tempting, given the treasures that they had stored up there, but the price was too high. No one ever returned from that place. Until now. Interesting. He'd lost an eye and was older, but it was him. She knew it. And what was even more interesting was that even in White Harbor, away from Dorne, Tyrion Lannister kept hiding his identity. Jason Hill, he called himself, whilst his son was Patrick. She knew the boy's true name, though, Alarion. Why would a Lannister need to hide his identity, though? Where had he been? Where was he going? She had observed them both very carefully, using every trick, every stratagem that she had wormed out of Father. Changing her appearance was easy. Making sure she was not seen was trickier. Tyrion Lannister may have lost an eye, but he had gained guile. Anyway, she was now in one of the disguises she had created beforehand. She had bound her breasts, cut her hair severely, removed her earrings, and put on the robes of a novice at the Citadel. As far as everyone, bar the captain, knew, she was a novice called Daenerys, and he was headed to the wall to gather information for the maester he was training under. She'd only had to threaten one sailor so far with her knife, after he had admired her arse, and then commented on how much a boy like him might learn from a real man. She looked back at the shore. She'd written to Father from White Harbor, and she hoped that he got the letter soon. It wasn't just the fact that Tyrion Lannister was still alive. The Bay of White Harbor had been full of ships. The Company of the Rose had arrived there, and word had it that their mysterious leader was a Stark. Word also had it that Lord Manderley was headed to Castle Black, to meet Lord Eddard Stark and the rest of the Lords of the North. Something was happening. Everyone was talking about it, even if few could agree on what it was. Tyrion Lannister had looked about, listened, talked to his son intently about many things, including the need for good furs, and had then taken this ship, bound for Eastwatch by the Sea. She'd passed on one last thing to Father in that letter. Tyrion and Alarion Lannister were guarding something. She didn't know what, but they were guarding something. Life was not going to be boring. At least she had bought new clothes as well, with a lot of fur on them. The North was fucking freezing. By the end of the first day, he was convinced that being the Stark in Winterfell was boring. It involved lots of parchments, some of which he had to sign. It also involved times when he had to listen to Mother and Maester Luwin talk about things that sailed far over his head, like the animal husbandry bits and the work on the broken tower that seemed to involve more language of the eyebrow on their part. He wasn't sure what was going on there, but Mother had told him very firmly that he was to go nowhere near it. He had very briefly considered the fact that as the Stark in Winterfell, he could give himself permission to climb things again. Then he'd thought about what Father would say about that, and the idea very rapidly died. The days that followed confirmed his decision that this was all very boring. At least he could escape the tedium at times and go off and train with Robert and Edric. His friends had more freedom than he did at the moment, and it rankled more than a bit. Robert was riding Surefoot whenever he could, whilst Edric was being taught about warhammers by Ser Roderick Castle himself, who knew quite a bit about it. But then Ser Roderick seemed to know a lot about every kind of weapon. Grown-ups could be very odd at times. He liked the fact that Castle and his nephew knew so much about so many weapons. That said, Jari did seem to walk about with a silly grin on his face at times. He'd seen him talking to Mother about something the other day, after which he'd walked away so fast that it had almost been a run, and now all of a sudden people were baking pies and being cheerful and talking about torches in the Godswood. He sat in the chair now and stared dismally at the things he needed to sign on behalf of Father. To one side, Mother was sorting through a few things that needed to be organized. And then Maester Luwin rushed in, looking more than a bit unsettled. "My lady, ravens have arrived, one from King's Landing and one from White Harbor." He handed them both over to Mother, whose eyebrows shot up as she read them. "Oh," Mother said eventually. "The king is coming here." Ned expected that, but this other message, "The Company of the Rose has returned," led by an Edric Stark, and with dozens of cousins of the Lords of the North. What is this? The message is from Ser Wylis Manderly, Lord Manderly's eldest son. "I have seen his hand before, my lady, and there was news before from Pentos that the Company of the Rose was going there, seeking passage across the narrow sea. Lord Stark wanted confirmation before he left for Castle Black." Mother and Maester Luwin both stared at him. "What funny book, Bran?" Mother eventually asked. "I saw it earlier," he said, rolling his eyes a bit. "Part of that pile over there that Father has piled up, it's the red one with all the numbers, that he didn't understand. I noticed it because it's got an embossed thingy on the spine of the book." "Well, I mean that I noticed it the other day." The light hit it. "You were talking about my duties whilst Father is away. I was a bit bored." "The Company of the Rose?" Bran asked. "Father told me about them once. Their forefathers refused to bend the knee to Akon the Conqueror. I asked him why, and he didn't know." "Is that about that funny book that was in that pile? I saw it earlier." "Better eyes than mine. I never saw that," Maester Luwin grumped, before sticking his hands in his sleeves. A sign that he was thinking very hard. This was a bad thing. It meant more language of the eyebrow. Mother exchanged a long look with Maester Luwin. They seemed to be amused about something, and also a bit exasperated. After a moment, Mother stood up and crossed over to the pile of books, sorted through them quickly, and then came back with a red book, the one that he had been talking about. She peered along its spine. "A rose indeed. You have keen eyes, Bran. Well done." Sitting down, she carefully opened it. "I remember this one," she said softly. Ned had no idea what these figures meant, and the other books were more important. Or so it seemed at the time. I don't think that Ned really looked at this properly. Bran looked at. There were a lot of lines of numbers. Some were in black ink. Many were in green ink, and some were in red ink. Sometimes there were notes by them, and the writing was all different. The last page of writing made Maester Luwin gasp slightly. "That is the hand of Lord Stark's father. My lady, Lord Rickard Stark wrote those numbers and those words." He frowned at the numbers and the words. Something about Bravos and some kind of protection. "The dates," Mother mused. "The last one is dated. It's dated to just before my good father left for King's Landing." "Left for his death, you mean, my lady," the Master sighed. "Well now, it must mean something. We must puzzle out the meaning. Especially as this Edwin Stark says that he rides for Winterfell to present, a list of those who have returned to their families, and some who will refound lost estates, whatever that means." "Jon Arryn." Mother and Maester engaged in another staring competition, whilst Bran yawned so hard that his jaw cracked. Yes, being the Stark in Winterfell was no fun at all. The sun was starting to head down to the horizon as he entered the room where the small council was to meet. He was early, but then that was a good thing. It gave him a chance to sit and collect his thoughts. The map on the wall caught his eye for a moment, and he sighed deeply. What would it be like to just drop everything after the word came that Robert was ruling properly again, with Stannis as his hand? To go home, back to the Vale, back to the Bloody Gate and the Eyrie, to the Mountains of the Moon, and all the sights and sounds and smells of his youth. What would it be like? He tired too easily. He had headaches at times. He felt old and worn out. But he was an Eredin, and he was temporary hand of the king, at least until the reins of governance had been switched to a functioning court in Winterfell, or wherever Robert decided to base himself until all this was dealt with. Boots sounded in the corridor, and he turned to watch Renly Baratheon stride in with the new master of coin, Lord Orton Merryweather. It was not exactly an orthodox choice. The big man from the Reach, with the truly impressive nose, had a good head for law, And oddly enough, for numbers, he had not been their first choice, more like their third choice. But another Florin would not have been a good idea, and old Lord Stoneheart, well, Weakheart might be a better choice. The man had beamed at being told that he was being considered for a position on the small council, before clutching at his chest and dropping dead on the spot. If only Lycia had given him more sons. It was just him and Robert, though. He refused to call him by Lycia's ridiculous nickname. Sweet Robin, Robert Arryn would one day rule the Vale, and his son would have to be strong. He rubbed his head again as the familiar ache appeared and then disappeared, before pouring himself a small glass of watered wine. Picasso had told him that he had to rest, had to relax, had to wait for his strength to return. Eventually, that meant waiting. He hated waiting. So far, Merryweather had proven himself to be courteous, reasonably astute, very well-traveled, and husband to a remarkably beautiful woman from Myr. Merryweather was a decent choice. A safe pair of hands was what they needed. Not an overly clever man. After Batsley, he'd never trust a man who said that he was good with coin. Not after that poisonous little weasel. Lord Arryn, Merryweather said with a short bow. You are well? Tired, John replied with a slight smile. I tire easily, but Lord Stannis made me temporary hand until he sends word from Winterfell that he has rejoined his grace, so I must do my duty. I am still a little unsure as what your title is, John, Renly said with an easy smile. Acting hand, temporary hand, second hand. Most droll, Lord Raxley. Most droll, tittered a voice to one side. Varys glided into the room, on silent slippered feet. I see that we are almost all here. Tired of everyone asking me that bloody question, John wanted to shout at him, but instead he smiled a little. Tired, Grandmaster. And yes, I am taking the powders you prescribed for me in warm wine. Heartily foul they taste too, but they are having an effect. What he didn't mention was the fact that Quill had hired a trusted man to test everything. If he died tomorrow, then he wanted everyone to know why and who. A shuffling and harumphing heralded the arrival of Grandmaster Peacell, who blinked at them all, rheumily, before focusing on John. And how do you feel today, my Lord of Arryn? The small council found their seats and sat. John looked about and then leant forwards a little. Well, my lords, the king apparently passed Galltown 2 days ago, so he should at the very least be level with the Fingers by now. A few more days and his party will be at White Harbor. I found it rather telling that they didn't take the wheelhouse, Ren said with a slight smile that turned to a grimace. Although the Queen's reaction, once she finds out that it was forgotten, will be interesting. Pycelle shook his head. A fast journey. Most inadvisable in the place like the North. Very inhospitable place. And loud I suspect, Varys muttered just loud enough for John to hear him. Very loud. Grandmeister, that wheelhouse loses or breaks a wheel roughly once every 20 miles, Rotsley pointed out dryly. If the road is bad, sometimes even more often. It may be relatively comfortable, but it's damn slow. And Robert's moving fast at the moment. Damn fast, even by his standards. Saxley and the children will get a lesson in riding. That and discomfort might do them all some good. Pycelle harumphed again, whilst Merryweather looked politely baffled. Varys broke the moment. In the meantime, my little birds have been singing some interesting tales to me. There has indeed been fighting by the God's Eye. Apparently some claiming to be members of the Faith Militant tried to get to the Isle of Faces to burn the weirwood there to the ground. He said it very matter-of-factly, and John felt his stomach freeze in terror. Varys, please tell me that they failed. There has long been an unspoken compact regarding the Isle of Faces. It has to remain intact. It must not be touched. The last thing we need is a war between those who count themselves First Men and those who count themselves Andal. Oh, they did indeed fail, my lord, Varys said. But it is the manner of their failing which is interesting. According to my little birds, the Faith Militant was being opposed by some local villagers with ties to the Isle, led by a former soldier. When the Faith brought a number of hedge knights, well, there seems to have been something of an intervention. Mounted men dressed as green men from the Isle. The terror was replaced with astonishment. Green men? From the Isle of Faces? On the mainland? The astonishment deepened. The Green Man? Yes, my lord, led, according to one rather insistent source of mine, by a very tall old man who some said was the Green Man. I'm sorry, Merryweather broke in. Who is this Green Man? Jonna leant back in his seat and then raised both eyebrows. I don't know. The green men keep very much to themselves. All the crown has ever known about them is that they recruit from those with the blood of the first men. Sometimes there are tales about how they are selected. Some say that they are called there. Sometimes they're from the north. Sometimes they're from the Stormlands. A few are stony Dornish. They go to the Isle, and then they never leave. Never. The Green Man leads them. It's a position, a rank filled by many over the years. How he's chosen is a mystery. But there have been tales of those who have traveled to the Isle of Faces to consult with the Green Man. Some say that they have their futures predicted there, or they're given just a hint about their fate, or if what they do is wise or not. Legend has it that Edmund Tully visited the Green Man of the time after Aegon burned Harrenhal. What they talked about is a mystery. Legend also has it that Admiral Illyrion went there during the Dance of Dragons, to be told what. No one knows, it's a mystery. And there is one final meeting. I have heard that Rhaegar Targaryen visited the Isle of Faces, not once, but twice. Once just before the tourney at Harrenhal, and once just before the Ruby Ford. Varys nodded somberly. I had heard that as well, my lord. I was never able to find out why he went there. Surely all that these green men have is, well, superstitious rubbish, Pycelle broke in. Legends from the time of the first men? Then why would Rhaegar Targaryen go to them? Merryweather muttered. I remember him well. He was a strange man at times, much concerned with prophecies. He was a Targaryen, almost the last of the Targaryens, Renly muttered. His father was a madman. Any wonder he was strange? Jon rubbed at his forehead tiredly. Very well. The Green Men are involving themselves in matters in Westeros for the first time in centuries. We must talk to this Green Man to find out what they want. And we must send word to Winterfell about this. The king must know, as must Ned. What else? He could admittedly be odd, Varys conceded. But as others have sought advice from the Isle of Faces, well, who knows? And I must confess that the Isle has been one of the few failures for my little birds. King Aerys once wanted to know what was happening there. I was unable to find out for him, or, for that matter, his Grace King Robert. One little bird I sent there was once found wandering about a village afterwards with no memory of what had happened. There are confused reports of rising of the Faith militant near Raventree Hall and High Heart, Varys muttered. Apparently Sir Myr Tully has ridden forth from Riverrun to confront them at the latter, and there are odd reports from Dorne. More and more of the stony Dornish have been seen heading north. Oh, and something odd also came in from the Reach. Apparently Lord Mace Tyrell has retired to his favorite hunting lodge, leaving the running of the Reach to his eldest son, Wellis Tyrell. Richelieu had turned a slightly odd color and was opening his mouth to say something when a fist pounded at the door. Come! Jon shouted, slightly irked at the interruption. Rosalie looked puzzled at this, whilst Merryweather smiled slightly. I have joined the small council at a time of crisis. The latter rumbled when he saw Jon raise an eyebrow at him. Much as I admire Lord Tyrell, Willis Tyrell is the best of the Tyrells, in my view. Quill strode in through the opening door with a message in his hand, which, after approaching and bowing quickly to Jon, he handed over. From the foxhold, my lord. Jon looked at Quill. The man had an odd look in his eyes, like an odd kind of triumph. Taking the letter, he looked down at it. Shock roiled his mind for a moment. Then he smiled grimly. Your pardon, my lords. It seems that my wife has been found. Lord Caxley writes from the foxhold that her party sought refuge there, as she was very ill. He passed the message over to Pycelle, who scrabbled at it with interest in his eyes. It seems that I did indeed stab her back in her attack on me. Oh, whoa, Rainsley quipped. Then he sobered a little. Your pardon. Stabbed where? In, the arm, Lord Renly, Pycelle replied. The wound corrupted. It seems that Lord Caxley's maester tried to save her arm at the elbow, but was unable to do so. Instead, he had to amputate it at, the shoulder. He put the message down, a most serious procedure. My lord, you must prepare yourself for the possibility that she will not survive this. From what this message says, the maester of the foxhold has no small skill, but this would be a grievous blow for even a strong warrior. Indeed not, my lord, Pycelle muttered. Such a trip would mostly likely kill her. Then he paused. Casley. I thought that the lord of the foxhold was Lord Collish. At least she has been found, Jon said heavily, and she is no longer a threat to my son, and if she lives, then we will get a reason from her as to why she attacked me. In the meantime, Lord Caxley also writes that he rides for King's Landing. Humph, I wonder why he isn't bringing Lysa, a former sellsword, Paxal Harums. Are you sure that such trust is warranted, my lord? Such men are hardly noble, hardly trustworthy. Kalish died without legitimate issue, Jon said quietly. Lord Caxley is a former sellsword who I trust absolutely. This triggered a slight cough from Varys. This sellsword Grand Maester is the man who caught the late and very much unlamented Peter Baelish. Paxal absorbed this for a moment. Ah, he said eventually. Well then, at times an infusion of new blood is most welcome indeed. Targaryen. The oil in the lantern to one side was starting to run out, judging by the dying of the light. He peered at it crossly and then sighed and closed the book. Time to stop reading and start sleeping. It was late enough as it was. There was so much in this book. No wonder Ned Stark had been very thoughtful when he had handed it over, saying that Daisy would need to make copies, many copies. And there were hints about some of the weapons of their ancestors. The Fist of Winter, which old Lord Shearstone thought might be hidden somewhere in the crypts of Winterfell, had been thought to be made from metal found in a fallen star, one that had fallen near Winterfell itself. There had been a little treatise about naming habits, as well as mention of other weapons. Dawn was mentioned, as was the spear of the Gardener Kings, and some kind of axe in Casterly Rock, one that had apparently vanished at least 200 years ago. He ran a hand over the spine of the book, and then placed it on his chest and stared at the ceiling. Daisy's father had been a very gifted historian, a very gifted writer. Come to that. His writing had been organized, neat, but elegant. He had known when to differentiate between known facts and theories about possible facts, and he had had an excellent way of laying out the possible facts behind legends, explaining, verifying, and knowing when to admit that something was too outlandish to be true. Speaking of south of the neck, there was even a short list of families with First Men blood that had been known, or rumored to have been known, to have the green sight. Much to his interest, the Casterlys were on that list, which meant that the Lannisters were as well. Those with the gift had, it seemed, dwindled quite a bit since the arrival of the Andals, but it still emerged every now and then. Other things were mentioned as well. Green Seers and Green Men. The Isle of Faces was apparently very important to all First Men, as it was a proper weirwood grove, as opposed to the odd tree here and there south of the neck. He wondered who the last Lannister with the green sight had been. It wasn't something that Father had ever talked about. In fact, it was highly doubtful that Father would ever talk about that. Or think about it. Come to that. Although he might raise a scornful eyebrow at the very mention of it, then he narrowed his eyes a little. There had been an odd reference to one Tyrek Lannister. Wait, he had been the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, hadn't he? The one who had ordered the abandonment of the Night Fort? Speaking of the Night Fort, he made a note to look up any mention of that as well. There had been some odd references in the chapter about the building of the wall, about artifacts that had been used at the building of the old castle there. Something about a seat of sight, or something like that. Lord Shearstone had stressed that the tale was an old one, and obscure even for the North. Lord Shearstone, he blinked a little in the dying lamplight, and then reluctantly placed the book to one side. He needed his sleep, but he still cursed the name of Sir Willem Boodle, the man who had most likely murdered Lord Shearstone. Damn that man! He would never now have the chance to meet such a brilliant writer and historian as Lord Shearstone, and the gods alone knew how rare it was to read a genuinely good new history book these days. He blew out the lamp and laid back in the absolute darkness that had fallen. Tonight's camp was another holdfast. This one occupied. The local lord had been a bit stunned by the approach of Lord Stark and his party, but he had made them very welcome. Agent Stark was no longer with them. He had ridden south at dawn, headed for Winterfell. His tale had been a fascinating one. A lost base once used by the Rangers of the Night's Watch. A man who had been wandering possibly for centuries. A real tale of magic and of whites. Whites! He'd seen something that few had for thousands of years. The severed and still moving head of a white. He knew that they were out there. He knew on an intellectual level that such things existed. But to see one, well, it made it all suddenly very real. The threat was out there. Father needed to see that head. So did Robert Baratheon. It might just kick the latter out of his sloth and lethargy. Perhaps. He rolled over and closed his eyes. More hard riding tomorrow. What fun. At least the saddle's wars were starting to respond to treatment. Edmure. The main courtyard of Reborn was filled with noise as he strode out of the doorway and into the crowd. All around him, men were heaving themselves into saddles, checking cinches, or doing any one of 100 little things as they prepared themselves to possibly go into battle. Edmure. He looked at the crowd grimly and then cursed himself for being a soft-headed fool. That it had come to this, riding out against men of the Riverlands. Sadly, they were now men of the faith militant, who would not listen to reason and who had to be stopped from doing something stupid. Burning down God's woods, 7 hells, burning down anything was incredibly stupid. With Father ill, that made him effectively Lord of the Riverlands, and there was no way that he was going to have people setting God's woods on fire and then raving about the old gods and pagans. The Andal invasion had been hundreds of years ago. He had no intention of restarting those hatreds. Plus, the faith militant appeared to want quite a bit of power. He set his jaw slightly. If some of them had to die in order for peace to be restored, then he was happy with that. He hated the thought of it, but he had no choice. What he really needed was the time to get word to Ned and ask what was going on. The call had shaken him far more than he cared to admit. It had shown that there was something happening to the north. Something that was old and powerful and capable of reaching those with the blood of the first men. The leather armor he was wearing chafed a little in places, and he pulled at it slightly as he approached his horse. Rosieran snickered at him a little as he caught sight of him, and he eyed him back. "Behave, you," including him, which frightened him a little. He was faithful to the 7. He had been brought up with the lessons of the 7 in his ears from various septons, but the call that had called to something else, something deeper within him. Naturally, the Maester arrived just as he was putting a boot in the stirrups. "Sir Edmure, Lord Tully is awake again and wishes to see you at once." He removed his boot and then glared at the man. "Yes, Fiben?" Father was awake. He'd been ill for a few weeks now, but perhaps it was starting to pass. He nodded and then looked about for his master-at-arms. "Timon, take the men out. Head for High Heart at once. I want that place protected at all costs. I'll join you as fast as I can. My father needs me." To his surprise, he found Father pulling on some boots, huffing as he did so. He looked tired and ill, but he was fully dressed. He scowled at him. "Father, you are not coming with us. You aren't well." Father returned the scowl for a moment before sighing. "I know," he said quietly, "but I was at least going to see you off, and there's a lot to do." Timon nodded somberly and then started to shout orders. As the men began to file their way out over the drawbridge, Edmure strode off to Father's room. "I know," he replied in a level voice. "This mad septon must be brought to justice. I like it not, but it must be done." The call to Winterfell. "Yes," Father said heavily. He finished pulling his boots and then sat back and looked at Edmure. "You must be strong for what lies ahead. This movement, this rising by those who would bring back the faith militant, it must be stopped. Every Lord Paramount will agree on this, even that idiot in Highgarden. It's foolish beyond words, and there's something in the water, Edmure. Some current is stirring in the deep waters. I feel it. Something's coming." He paused and pulled a face. "As for her, there is no sign at all of her. I still can't believe that she would do such a thing." Father nodded. "That concerns me greatly. We must make Riverrun ready for whatever storms are ahead of us," he sighed. "Any word of the others?" Edmure shook his head slowly. No sign of Uncle Brendan for many days now. The last sighting had him headed towards the God's Eye. There are no more reports of fighting there, at least. The Isle of Faces seems to be safe after some kind of skirmish, but I have sent a raven to Harrenhal to ask Lady Wen to find out what happened there. Father shook his head, as stony-faced and grim as Edmure had ever seen him. "She is dead to us, for her to do what she did. I never want to hear her name again. Thank the gods she didn't kill her husband. Jon Arryn is one of the best men I have ever met. What she did? I know, Father. I know. When she is found, then she will meet justice." His gaze dropped. His own sister. "With that, and the fact that Brendan has vanished, I have made a decision. You must marry, and soon. Yes, you ride to fight the faith militant today. What if you are wounded or killed? At the moment, the succession would pass to Kat's second son, Bran. He is a good lad, but what does he know of Riverrun or the Riverlands. He may look like a Tully, but his heart is based in the north. He's Ned's son, and a Stark. The Tully name must live on. It must live on through you. Father stood on slightly shaky legs before turning and placing his hands on Edmure's shoulders. I wish that I could ride with you. I wish that I could fight with you. But you must do this. I have shielded you a little too much from things like this. Perhaps. But no more. I am proud of you. Do your duty, and then return to Riverrun. We must find you a wife. He stared at his father. I must. Father laughed shortly, a laugh that turned into a cough. Agreed. I would not pair you with any of the late Lord Frey's daughters. He looked at Father, his mind whirling. Father sounded so driven. He nodded slowly. Very well, Father, but I would beg of one thing from you. Please? No Freys? He smiled back at Father and then took his leave. Before striding back to the courtyard, Rosierne was being held by a stable hand, with a small honor guard nearby. Edmure mounted quickly and then nodded at the others before spurring Rowan out of the gates and over the drawbridge. He had a hill to defend against some madmen. He tried to ignore the mutterings around him in the big longship. Not everyone liked this little trip that they had been ordered to take, and young Drin had had to be spoken to by Gelmar. He'd waved his knife under the boy's nose and told him to shut the fuck up, or that he'd slit his fucking throat and leave him for the seagulls to peck out his eyes. He really needed to have that word with Ned. What had he started? Axe. They furled the sails once they caught sight of the island up ahead. It wouldn't do to arrive in daylight. Not on their mission. No dark deeds like this needed a dark light. There would be the barest of new moons tonight. That said, Dren had a point. Danfair had given him their orders, and there was something about that man these days that set his teeth a little on edge. It was the eyes. There was something mad about his eyes. He paused for a heartbeat. He just used the word mad about Danfair. That was bad. As the sun started to kiss the horizon, he squinted along a bearing towards the island, noted which way the wind was blowing, and then kicked the men into life. Row you maggots. We've got reaving to do. They rowed. They rowed the way that Ironborn did, properly and with the occasional curse about any idiot who was a bit behind the stroke. As they rowed, darkness fell. They reached the shore roughly when he had planned to. It was all a bit rough and ready in terms of timing. Not that he cared that much, as they dragged the boat up onto the shore. Their orders were simple. Get to Harlaw, raid the harbor, burn a few ships, and then leave. Their job was to provoke Lord Harlaw into doing something stupid. He knew something else. He was nervous. This was a bad idea. The reader was not a fool. Many scorned his books. What kind of Ironborn needed books? But the man wasn't a fool. Damn fair, though. Perhaps 2 or 3 ships instead of just one. But he had his orders. He led the men along the beach and up the path that led to the nearby harbor. They marched in silence, and with every step a vague foreboding grew a little inside him. As they reached a slight dip before the harbor, he sighed and then stopped the men with a muttered command. Torches, he hissed. Light the torches, now, fast and hard. Kill when you have to. Burn whatever you can. If you see a possible salt wife, grab her if you can. But remember this. We are doing this fast, and if I have to leave a bloody fool behind because he forgot that, then I will. The men nodded grimly in the darkness, and then they started lighting the torches. As they readied themselves, he drew his sword, sucked in a gulp of air, opened his mouth to shout the command to attack. And at that moment, an arrow thwacked into the eye of the man with the torch standing next to him. There was a moment of absolute shocked silence, and then as the man started to collapse bonelessly to the ground, more arrows emerged out of the night, straight for his men and especially those who were holding torches. Fuck it, he cursed to himself as he looked around. The torches had killed his night vision. Where were they? Then he caught sight of more arrows headed his way, and he ducked, which meant that an arrow meant for his head instead went over him and into Gelmar's throat. Blood sprayed everywhere like a small bow wave breaking. Charge, he found himself shouting. At them. The attackers were in amongst his men now, and they were carving them up. They fought as a unit, whilst his shocked men fought on their own. How had they been ready? They were ready for us, he thought dazedly. And then an arrow came out of nowhere and punched through his leather jerkin and into his right shoulder. Agony hit him, and he let out a choked scream as the sword fell from his hand. But it was the others who charged first. Another volley of arrows, and then the ground shook as men emerged out of the darkness. They were fully armored with swords, spears, and shields, and as they came, they shouted just one word again and again, Harlaw, Harlaw. They were ready for us, he thought, dazedly, and then an arrow came out of nowhere and punched through his leather jerkin and into his right shoulder. Agony hit him and he let out a choked scream as the sword fell from his hand. The attackers were in amongst his men now, and they were carving them up. They fought as a unit, whilst his shocked men fought on their own. How had they been ready? Then his mind caught up with his eyes. They were losing. His men were dying before his eyes. He reached down, picked up his sword, suppressed a moan at the flare of agony from his shoulder, and then bellowed, "Back! Back to the ship! Disengage and back to the ship!" He heard the odd cry of acknowledgement, but as he watched the men started to be overrun by the attackers, there was an exultant tone to the cries of Harlaw. Harlaw! Now, and even the odd cry of the reader, a spear point jabbed at him, and he barely had the strength to fend it off with his sword. And then he ran, stumbling here and there. Others followed him, but few of them, all too few. The pain from his shoulder was bad, but he didn't want to die, and he somehow kept one foot placed clumsily before the other. An arrow came out of the dark sky and hit the back of the man in front of him, who let out a choked scream and then went down. He tried to swerve, but his legs were shaking badly, and instead he fell over the body. The shock caused agony to flare up in his shoulder, and then darkness took him. When he opened his eyes again, he blinked muzzily at the sky. Where was he? And then the pain hit. Fuck, he was on Harlaw. And he was on his back. Had someone turned him? Boots crunched on gravel, and a man with a torch approached. He was dressed in armor, but he knew his face. The reader himself. "Alec," he said grimly before bending over him. "Alcus, you fool. To use Ironborn tactics on Ironborn? I had men with Myrish glasses on the high ground near the best points on the island before sunset every day for the past 2 weeks. Waiting for something like this? We saw your ship at last light. More than enough time to get ready. There was a word for this, wasn't there? Oh yes. Irony." He smiled weakly and then coughed wetly. "Ordered to..." By who? He coughed wetly again, used his good hand to wipe at his mouth, and saw the blood smeared there. Fuck it. Who cared now? Dan Fair. Why? Punish you, provoke you, get you to do something stupid. The reader nodded shortly. Then he looked at him again. "I have had enough," he said in a voice like nothing Alec had ever heard before, of Greyjoy's stupidity. Nuncle, the word was said by a woman in full armor who approached carrying a torch. "Send the raven to Old Wyke. Tell the stone brows that the time is now." "Yes, my lord," the woman said after a moment, and then she strode off. Natick coughed again. Blood on his hand again. "Harlaw, end me. Mercy, stroke." The older man stared down at him. "You were a good man once," Harlaw muttered. "I owe you this much." He pulled out a knife, and the last thing that Alec ever saw was it coming down on his throat. The run into White Harbor was interesting. It certainly wasn't boring. The number of ships in the harbor, or the estuary leading to the harbor, seemed to surprise the captain of the ship they were traveling on. "Busier than normal," he muttered as Amy joined him at the rail. 2 or 3 times the vessels that would normally be here. "Something's up." He looked at the boats and then raised his eyebrows. "I'll take your word for it. Good, Captain. I wonder why it's so busy then." The other man shrugged. "I don't know, sir." "Jaime, wait. I recognize that ship." He pointed at a departing vessel that, to Jaime's eyes, looked exactly like all others, apart from a slightly different shade of sail, and then grabbed for his speaking trumpet. "Ahoy there! Is that the Pantosi Rock?" There seemed to be a flurry of shouts on the approaching ship as it folded a sail. Furled a sail. All this sailing parlance bored him. And slowed a little, and then a man was standing on its bows with a speaking trumpet of his own. "Aye, is that you, Corlin? How are you not dead yet?" "Skill," the captain drawled. "At least you've got your scow pointed the right way, bow first." "I told you before I was drunk that time," came the response. "What's amiss?" "What's amiss? Why is the harbor so crowded?" They were walking down the length of their ships as they shouted, with Yami a fascinated spectator. "Northmen going home. We helped ship the Company of the Rose across the narrow sea. There were a lot of the bastards, with a lot of equipment. Coin too. Paid me well. Oh, and there's others coming in from all over Westeros. You heard of this call?" The captain hesitated just a moment, Aye, he finally shouted back. Fair made my skin crawl. I heard it. Rather you than me. Strange times, my friend. Strange times. I'm off, back to Pentos. Odd things happening there, too. And with that he waved, bellowed, an order to hoist more sail, and passed from earshot. Jaime and the captain watched the ship go, both frowning. This was all most odd. Perhaps he should have listened more to what was being said. And then there was a shout of, "Look out below," that heralded the arrival of the Fat King as he climbed down a rope and landed on the deck remarkably lightly. He eyed the king for a moment. The man was dressed almost like a sailor because he now loved to climb rigging to the point where Cersei had been eyeing the rigging with a certain glint in her eye, and it was starting to show. He was not fat, not anymore. Heavy-set perhaps, but not fat. A lot of muscle had come back in a remarkably short space of time. So, the Company of the Rose has returned. Varys said that they were on the way. Baratheon peered at the city ahead. The north, a hard place, but a beautiful one, breeds good men and women. The biggest of the 7 kingdoms by size, aye, and now the most mysterious. His voice trailed off, his eyes on the distant horizon, or on something that Jaime couldn't quite see. Oh, aye, there's a war coming. I smell it in the air. Best get ready. By the time that the ship had broken out the royal standard and then started to approach the main wharf, there was a crowd assembled on it. A pinnace had gone on ahead of the flotilla, and word had obviously spread that the king had arrived. In pride of place was a carpet, with a rather fat man wearing a greenish surcoat with a merman on it, standing at the end. The problem was that it wasn't the right fat man. Baratheon, now dressed properly, strode down the gangplank, and as he set foot on land, the crowd knelt almost as one. He strode up the carpet, with Jaime and Selby not too far behind, and then stopped. "Your Grace," the kneeling man ahead of him said, "White Harbor is yours." Baratheon gestured for the kneeling fat man to stand up. "Sir Wireless Manderly, is it not?" "Aye, Your Grace," Manderly said as he stood with an effort, the others standing as well after a few heartbeats. "Is your father ill or something?" Sir Wireless looked the king in the eye. "He has gone to Castle Black, Your Grace. Lord Stark has called the Lords of the North there." Well, this was unexpected. Salzian's eyebrows flickered slightly. Jaime stole a look at Baratheon's face, which had a look of deep concentration. "Has Ned Stark called his banners, then?" "Not yet." "Your Grace, he has called my father and the others to Castle Black for a council of war. Though, and to spy out the lie of the land bethinks, north of the wall." Now this was pure idiocy. However, Baratheon rocked backwards on his heels for an instant, and then exchanged an odd look with Salmi. "The call was loud here, then." Sir Wireless bowed his head and nodded. "Like a thunderclap, Your Grace," said hoarsely. "It was heard by us all. My father was very shaken. We all were." He straightened up. "Something dark is coming, Your Grace." He said the last words intently. Baratheon looked at him and then nodded. "Aye," he said after a long moment, as he laid a large hand on the fat man's shoulder. "When is your father due in Castle Black?" "In the next day or so, Your Grace. If things went as was planned." This made Baratheon pull a face. "Not much point in me heading up there, then. By the time I get there, Ned's council of war will be over." "Very well, Sir Wireless. We will need your hospitality for a few days as we prepare for the trip to Winterfell. I will meet Lord Stark there." Sir Wireless nodded. "Of course, Your Grace. We have quarters prepared for you and your family." He nodded respectfully, as something behind them all, and Jaime turned slightly to see a slightly sour-faced Cersei march down the gangplank with her children behind her. "Oh, and we have messages for you at the new castle." Ravens brought them from King's Landing and other places. Baratheon nodded and then turned to his steward, a hard-faced Stormlander called Flinders. "Unload what we brought on the ships. We stay here for a few days, and then move to Winterfell. We'll be moving quickly. Do what you must, as I discussed with you on the ship." "Aye, Your Grace," Flinders muttered, and then vanished off. Baratheon wanted a fast trip to Winterfell. With the wheelhouse that Cersei liked to travel in, he must have knocked his head on something, Jaime thought with a hidden grin. "So, Sir Wireless, let us ride for the new castle," Baratheon rumbled as he strode through the parting crowd. "And you can tell me all about what's been happening." "Oh, and what of the Company of the Rose? I heard that they had returned." "They have, Your Grace," said Manderly as he followed. Their leaders have left for Winterfell. A Stark leads them. Baratheon paused for a moment and then strode on with a laugh. A Stark? A distant cousin to Lord Stark. Ned will find that passing strange, but then he's always wanted a large family. They strode on, but all of a sudden, Jaime felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. He carefully looked at the crowd around them, looking for any eyes that lingered. He had the oddest feeling of being watched all of a sudden. And then, after a long moment, it went away. He shrugged internally and then carried on walking to the waiting horses. Imagination. Robert. He looked at the pile of messages with some trepidation. He was tempted to send for a large ale and then put it off, but no. He was king and he threw himself into them. They had all be marked for his eyes only, and if anyone had read them, then he'd have their guts for garters. He had to admit something. Stannis might be a pain in the arse at times, but he was a good hand. His reports were succinct, informative, and bloody good. The first messages were about the fighting near the God's Eye. Something had happened there to damp everything down, and he wondered what someone had stamped on the faith militant there. Good and bloody hard. Excellent. He wished he could have been there. He reached for the next message, opened it, and then his breath caught. Jon. Jon had woken up. He found a massive grin stealing over his face before he stood up from the desk and then all but dancing in glee around it. Then he caught himself. Damn it, he had to act like a king. He turned back to the message. Jon was awake, and he was recovering. Pycelle thought that he would make a full recovery as long as he did not exert himself, and he snorted at that. Oh, he'd make sure that Jon didn't exert himself, even if he had to lock him in a fully equipped room with ever luxury known to man. The next messages were routine, and then he reached one that made him stop dead again. Stannis had gone to Dragonstone because a godswood had been found there, on Dragonstone, that rocky dragon-carved island. That made no sense at all. Then he paused, his mind whirling. No, wait, things had been mad enough of late. Stannis would not have gone without a bloody good reason, and besides, he was due to follow them to the north eventually. More messages, and then something written in Stannis' own hand. From Lord Stannis Baratheon, Hand of the King, to His Grace the King, Robert Baratheon. Traveled to Dragonstone to investigate report that godswood found by Shireen Baratheon and Gendry Storm. Story true. Lost godswood found in Heart Tree. Shireen cured of grayscale scars. Old gods have made their presence felt. Traveling at once for White Harbor with my family. He sank back into the chair in utter shock. This was astonishing. A sweet child Shireen. Not pretty, but she had a good heart and an even better mind. But there was always that sadness that lay like a blanket around her. The grayscale, not something that had ever been her fault, but it was something that made people stare and then look away, and she knew it as well. And now she was free of the grayscale. How? The old gods, they existed. He had known that before, but now he knew that for certain. He looked down at the message again, astonishing. Well, Ned would probably give one of his looks when he heard of this. That look that said, I told you so, but did you listen? Of course you bloody didn't. Someone was shouting something outside in the corridor that led to the room, and he looked up. Oh! The scold was here. The bloody nag. And sure enough, she burst in, followed by a slightly red-faced Sir Barristan Selmy. There you are, Cersei shouted. You dolt? You dullard, did you think that it was funny not to bring the wheelhouse to make your family suffer, your own family? We need to move fast to Winterfell, he said quietly, his mind still spinning more than a little. The wheelhouse would have slowed our progress, so I didn't give orders for it to be brought. So your family means nothing to you, Cersei bellowed, and he saw Selmy wince for a moment, and then he looked at him properly and frowned. Your Grace, is everything all right? Has there been any bad news about Lord Aaron? No, he woke up. That's good. But then there's this. He handed it over to Cersei, who took it with a frown that was almost a sneer. Selmy peered at the message, too. When Cersei looked up, there was a new look on her face, one that was perplexed. Is Stannis mad? Nothing can cure grayscale scars. And what's this about a godswood on Dragonstone? I don't know. That's what he said, though. He stood up again. Something's happening, Cersei. Something bigger than anything that anyone can imagine. She stared at him, baffled. This is nothing but insanity. And if you think that I have forgotten about the wheelhouse, then you're just as mad. And with that, she threw the message at him, whirled, and stamped out. That left Sir Barristan Selmy, who just stared at him. Your Grace? We train now, Sir Barristan, he said in a voice like stone. War is coming. I must be ready. You must be too. The north is where we fight this war. Robb. The boats on the long lake were something of a revelation. He'd expected some kind of barge organization, towed by different teams of horses at a good, steady pace, but instead there were large ships with sails that looked almost as if they came from the riverlands. When he had asked Father about them, he had looked amused for a moment, and then coughed slightly. Well, I did ask your mother, and Theon had a few suggestions about things he'd read as well. Seems to work. The winds mean a bit of tacking, but it's faster than a horse, and we'll be traveling at night as well. Cabins on these things aren't much, but we'll have to put up with it. He nodded and looked at the direwolves, who were gravely sitting in a row, Frostfire at their head, watching the shore go past with a look of grave fascination. Theon was standing by a stanchion, also staring out at the shore, and he walked over to join him. You all right? Theon started slightly and then smiled slightly. Just thinking, about what? His friend, and Theon was still his friend. So many things had been crammed into just a few months. Paused, his jaw working a little. The future, he said, eventually. What it holds, for me, for the North, for my family. I don't know what to do, Robb. I just don't. What can I do? You mean other than bring up a direwolf pup, fight at our sides as we fight back the others, save the wall and all of Westeros? A smile came and went quickly. Aw, that's quite a bit there, isn't it? But if I survive it... Oh, don't look at me like that. I'd heard Lord Stark's tales. War is a game of bloody chances and hard fighting. Then what? Back to the Iron Islands? I barely remember them, and besides, I doubt my father would want me now, after so many years of being a Greenlander. Theon sighed. My uncle Roderick, Lord Harlaw the Reader, wrote to me. You know, said that father was obsessed with the old ways. The iron price as a means to strengthening his rule. Mentioned the rebellion as well. Thing is, my father's an idiot. He thought that he could gain independence for the Iron Islands by taking on the rest of the realm. How many died until he realized how wrong he was? A silence fell as Robb stared at him. You don't want to succeed your father, do you? I don't know, Robb, Theon said in a choking voice. I don't know. I'm a northerner now, not Ironborn. I worship the old gods. I have a direwolf. The iron price means nothing to me now. I know what the cost of the iron price is. Blood. The Ironborn wouldn't want me as their lord. I wouldn't them as it stands now. He sighed again, before laughing slightly. Of course, I have to live long enough to make a decision. You're right. We have a war to fight. A war against something that we have to win again. What did you think when you saw that White's head? He remembered the look in the face of that dead woman, the way that the mouth worked, the way that the blue eyes swept around the room, and the mingling of horror and fascination that he'd felt. That was before the wrongness of it all hit him. The fact that this was something unnatural, evil in fact. I knew that we have a war that we have to win on our hands. Have to. We have no choice on this. We win or we all die. Aye, said a voice behind them, and they both started. Father had somehow appeared behind them, and he looked at them both with as serious an expression as he could muster. Something that made Robb swallow nervously. You do have the right of it. We win or we die. That is all we can think about for now. That said, Theon, you will get a better idea of what you want as time goes on. Fate would not be fate if it did not have surprises in store for you. From what I have heard, things are tense on the Iron Islands at the moment. Your father seems to have decided to ignore the call. That is not a popular choice for some, such as your uncle Lord Harlaw. Theon, I am reading the ravens from the Iron Islands very carefully. If your father does something stupid, then he will show himself off as an utter fool, Theon said bleakly. I understand, Lord Stark. I cannot... No, I will not fight for him. I don't care about being his heir. Asha can be his heir. Father nodded somberly. From what I've heard recently, she might not want to be his heir either. And then he strode off along the deck. Robb exchanged a long and troubled look with Theon, before his friend finally shrugged. Never cared much for the name Greyjoy anyway. What can be grey about joy? Which was a good point. Robb raised his eyebrows and then nodded. Just don't be a Grey Stark, brother. Too much history there. Theon shuddered. The Boltons again, he muttered. No, Gray mist, perhaps. I'll think about it. Robb nodded again before they both went back to watching the shore slide past. Do you think that the imp has his eye on Daisy, Surestone? Thean asked eventually. If he does, he'll have a lot of people watching him as they sharpen their swords in front of him, Robb replied with a certain grimness. My cousin's been through enough of late. That said, if he brings her booed, still warm heart on a plate, we might look on him a little more favorably. This brought him a bark of laughter from Theon. It might at that, well, how long to the wall? At this rate, a day to the end of the lake. At the rate that father rides 2 days after that to the new gift. A day to Molestown, perhaps, and then to Castle Black. Daean shivered a little and then looked back at the shore. The King's Road could be seen from here, and there was a trickle of wagons and other traffic going north. Hard riding. Urgent riding. We win or we die. Rimbin. They made camp in a small wood that evening. The party of green men was already smaller than it had been, with several of them traveling off in different directions. They were to do a little gardening. The green man had rather cryptically told Brienne and himself in some places that had been neglected. As they built the fire, Brynden noticed with a slight start that they were close to a ruin. It might have been an old holdfast or a tower built from large stones, and it looked older than anything he'd seen for some time. I've camped here before, the green man said softly as he saw Brynden looking at the ruin. A long time ago, when I had a squire called Egg. Egg? Then he made the connection. That was King Aegon? It was a good man, the best of the Targaryens. We walked around the ruins, wondered who had built them, speculated on the stones. Egg thought that this place had been built by the first men. He smiled slightly. Different times. Happier times. His eyes glittered for a moment. That was before Summerhall, and before I knew things. A short silence fell as they looked into the fire. After a long moment, Brienne looked at the green man. Where do we go now? High Heart, we will be needed there. How can you tell? The green man smiled slightly before standing. The first time I was here, I found something. Walk with me. They exchanged glances and then stood, following the old man as he led them through the trees and past the ruins. They passed the crumbled remains of a wall, and then he saw it. A heart tree. There was a heart tree here. The green man strode up to it and looked at it with some fondness. There are more of them in the south than you think, hidden here and there, in woods by ruins like this, waiting for people to remember them, ready to come alive again. He gestured at the ground, where small white-stemmed saplings with red leaves were starting to sprout. When the call went out, people started to remember. The old gods strengthened from that. And the heart trees heard it too. Magic lies not just in the hearts of men and women, but also in the air, in the water, in the earth. Weirwood trees tap into that, and that means that they can be used to those who are attuned to them. Like green men? Brynden asked shrewdly. Yes, you'll learn to do it. Why did you choose us again? You both see to the heart of matters, see the truth, even if it hurts, which is why you are needed. It is hard to see the truth at times. We face a hard future, with prophecies making it hard to see that truth. And prophecy is something that can be twisted, abused, and just simply misinterpreted. I have seen it happen right in front of me, which is why we are here. I need to show you both something. I thought you already had. The tree. The tree is a tool. It can be used to see what is past. You have already seen one glimpse back at the Isle of Faces. Now it's time to show you another. He placed his burn-scarred hand on the white trunk and then extended the other in their direction. Touch my hand, both of you. He swallowed nervously, noted that Brienne did something similar, and then reached out and touched the age-spotted hand at the same time that she did, and then fell into darkness. Down he fell, and then he sensed her next to him. Down into the darkness, and then he felt the ground beneath his feet. Looking about, he saw that they were in the great hall again. There was a fire burning in the hearth, and the green man was sitting on a chair, staring into the flames, his hood raised so that the horns loomed over his head. And then the doors at the end opened and a silver-haired young man strode into the hall. Brynden stared in astonishment. Rhaegar Targaryen, he muttered. By the old gods, just as I remember him. There was a combination of swagger, annoyance, and curiosity about the way that the younger man strode up to the green man. Your men, he snapped, are insolent. I am the heir to the Iron Throne, but they actually told me that only I could enter this hall. My men and women are loyal to me, and your title means nothing here, Rosier Targaryen. The Isle of Faces is outside the realm. That was agreed a long time ago by kings and princes now long dead. The prince stared at him for a long moment. They say that you can see the future. I have that curse on occasion. Curse? The future is never an easy thing to see. It can be like a broken window. Shards give a slightly different view depending on your perspective. Sometimes it's clear. Sometimes it's only obvious the closer you get, and sometimes it's only when it's past that you can see it. This seemed to irritate the younger man. For some it is very clear indeed. There were dreamers in my family, and I have read of prophecy extensively. I know what I have seen. This in turn seemed to amuse the green man. You do you? I do, the prince said firmly. Then why are you here? Because I read that people had come here to consult with your predecessors, Adam Valerian, and others. They came seeking answers. You seem to think that you already have them. So why did you come? Again, Rosier Targaryen folded his arms for a moment. Because I want to know if I am doing the right thing. Because I want to know that I am right. That only through me can the Song of Ice and Fire be sung. That only I can bind the realm closer together at the end of a war that I think is coming. The green man stared at him for a moment before sighing. Nothing I can say will convince you. I can sense that you are both right and wrong. Prophecy is difficult to interpret. It can be slippery. Nothing can be as it seems. You must be careful, and the Song of Ice and Fire, the prophecy of the prince that was promised, has been discussed by those who think they are wise for centuries. Longer than that, everyone has a theory. My theory, said the prince in a low and terrible voice, is correct. It fits the facts. I know it. I feel it. Then you do not need to be here. Have fun at the tourney. Beware of laughing trees. By the way, I hear that your father is coming to it. The prince stiffened. What? No, he is at King's Landing, and how would you know? The green man said nothing in reply, just staring back at the prince, who flushed a little and then stirred irritably. Very well, I must go. Perhaps we will meet again. The green man looked straight at Brynden and Brienne for a moment. Oh, we've met before today, and because of what you said, we'll meet again. It is inevitable now. Rhaegar Targaryen looked confused, and then seemed to shrug before turning on his heel and walking off to the doors. As he left, the green man sighed deeply. So that is what they have been reduced to. Then he looked at them again. One window closes, and another opens. Brandon opened his mouth to ask what he meant, but then the darkness fell again. He felt as if he was being pulled forwards for a moment, and then when he opened his eyes again, he was back in the great hall again. Once again, the green man was sitting by the fire, staring at the flames with his hood up. There was a chair opposite him. Once again, the doors opened. But the Rhaegar Targaryen who entered was different. He wore armor that gleamed with rubies, but his eyes did not gleam. They were sunken, and he looked as if he had not slept properly in weeks. His hair was caught in a queue at the back of his head, but he looked somehow unkempt. The prince walked slowly to the fire, and then sat in the other chair. You knew I was coming then, he said in a voice filled with tiredness and something else that Brynden couldn't put his finger on. As you said, I did. You march to war. I do, Cousin Robert marches south. I intend to meet him head on. Yes, you will meet him. You do not look well. The prince smoothed his hair unconsciously with a hand that shook a little. You were right, he said eventually. I did not see the truth after all. I just saw what I wanted to see. Everything has gone awry. The realm is broken into pieces. Because of me. Because of my pride. The green man stared intently at him. There's more than that, isn't there? The younger man stirred uneasily in his chair. I am ashamed of what I have done. I thought that it had to be done. But when she heard that her father and her brother were dead, killed by my madman of a father, she wanted to leave. I couldn't allow that. I had to force her. A short, nasty silence followed. So you are now both a prince and a rapist? The heir to the Iron Throne stirred again in his chair, blood rushing to his face, and then he seemed to cringe internally, to twist. His hands came up to cover his face for a long moment. Yes, he whispered. I thought it had to be done. The dragon needs 3 heads. You were certain. I was. And now, silence. Then I do not know. Then you have at least learned a little from this. Not enough, but a little. Rosier eventually seemed to drag his hands down and gaze at the green man. When will the nightmares end? When you are dead? He shuddered at that. I thought I would unite the realm from a terrible danger. Perspective is everything. I don't understand. Not yet. What do you plan to do next? Ride north, fight Robert and his army of rebels, end this war. How? By killing Robert Baratheon? How will that end the war? The prince frowned. He is their leader. Without him, don't be a fool, boy. He is their figurehead. Your father has murdered a Lord Paramount in a horrible manner. Every Lord Paramount has good reason to be nervous now. Do you think that killing Robert Baratheon will stop the Northmen from wanting vengeance for their slain lord and his murdered eldest son? Or stop the men of the Vale for fighting against the death sentence that your father has levied on Jon Arryn? Do you think that it will stop Ned Stark from seeking you out for taking his sister? Rosier Targaryen closed his eyes as if in pain and then covered them with one hand. No, he said tiredly, but this war must end. If you march north and you win, what will happen to your father? I have heard that he is as mad as Aerion Targaryen was. Or even madder. He burns people alive, boy, and he enjoys it. Enjoys it so much that he rapes his wife, your mother, after each burning. The hand came down. My father. Your father is a lunatic, a murderer, and a rapist. And in that last part, the apple did not fall far from the tree. Did it not? You cannot judge me, or my father. I have every right. The green man bellowed the words, and there was a slight susurration in the rafters as something seemed to stir. I was there when you were born. I knew your father well. The prince stared at the green man in shock. Who are you? He asked in a small voice. You cannot have been a green man all your life. The green man reached up and pulled down his hood. You would not remember me. I helped deliver you. I held you in my arms, and just before I gave you to your mother, you opened your eyes and looked at me. And in that moment, I knew that fate would not be kind to you. I placed you in your mother's arms, lit by the fires that claimed my friend, the king, and my namesake, his eldest son, and I knew that something terrible was coming. Rosier Targaryen stared at the old man, stared as if he did not believe the evidence of his own eyes. Then, he stopped, before rallying. Then you must be... No. That's impossible. You're dead. You died at Summerhall. The green man pulled his sleeve back and held up the arm with the terrible burn scars. I nearly did. I came here instead. I was once Sir Duncan of the Kingsguard, once called Sir Duncan the Tall. The prince stared and stared, and then he seemed to almost shrivel in the chair, his eyes going even deader, if such a thing was possible. You were said to have been the finest knight in the realm, he said eventually. I was just a knight. What would my great-grandfather have thought of me? The green man curled a lip. Very little, he said shortly. You have been, put simply, a fool. A cruel fool. The prince flinched at those words, as if he had been struck. After a long moment, he looked at the green man. You once advised my great-grandfather. Advise me now. What must I do? You know, in your heart, what you must do. There is one way to end the war. Seek out Robert Baratheon, face to face. Fight him. But he is taller and stronger than me, he would... His voice came to a halt as he looked into the implacable eyes of the green man. Ah, he said eventually. Ah, I see now. Yes, I am the given sacrifice, am I not? You asked what would end the war. You also asked when the nightmares would end. Of course. A short silence fell. Then he stood up slightly shakily. Thank you for your advice. It seems that I have a battle to fight, if not for the reason I first thought. I have never had to give such painful advice, but it is still appreciated. And with that, he walked away to the doors, his shoulders still slumped, a look of defeat hanging over him, but also with a certain grim purpose. He goes to his death, Brynden muttered, and just for a moment, Rhaegar seemed to turn his head in his direction and frowned slightly before leaving through the doors. Brienne nodded, a fierce look on her face. Good, she muttered. He will pay for his crimes. And with that, they were suddenly back at the Heart Tree. The green man lowered his arms. Rhaegar Targaryen thought he had read a prophecy correctly. He was wrong. Come, let us eat, and I will tell you of the prophecy he mentioned. Mother had finally told him what the excitement was all about. Apparently Jory Castle was to marry Anna, Robert's nursemaid. Not that he seemed to need a nursemaid much these days. He was too busy running about with Edric and Bran to the point where, according to Anna, he was starting to stop looking pasty. This was confusing. Robert looked nothing like a pasty. But he did look a bit browner from all of the sun, and all the riding that they'd been doing, and the archery, and the sword practice, although in Edric's case, it was Warhammer practice. It was odd to have such good friends, as in people who weren't family. The past month had been fun, except that he still couldn't climb the walls. Not that he missed it all that much at the moment. All the riding, archery, swordplay, dealing with paperwork, and above all running around and playing was a bit tiring. And now there was going to be a wedding. It was all very odd. At least Jory and Anna seemed very cheerful about the whole thing. Mother seemed amused and a bit wry. Sir Lordric Castle seemed to be lost in memories at times, and Septim Ordain was grumpy for no reason that he could fathom. As for Arya, she rolled her eyes every time the wedding was mentioned, while Sansa seemed to be taking notes and blushing half the time every time she looked at Domeric, who, it had to be said, kept blushing as well. When he wasn't practicing on that harp, that is, at least Domeric was still giving them all riding lessons. Robert was getting quite good on Surefoot, while Edric was getting to know his favorite horse, Greylock. As for Bran, he'd finally chosen a horse. Star had, well, a star on his forehead, and a way of staring at him in a slightly long-suffering manner. Seemed to like summer as well. He looked over at the broken tower. The top wasn't that broken anymore. According to Maester Luwin, it wouldn't be quite as tall as it had been, but it would be habitable again in a few months. There was scaffolding in places, and the ivy that had once covered part of it had gone. If he had still been allowed to climb, then the broken tower would no longer have been a challenge, which was a shame. Someone was shouting at the gatehouse, and he looked over. Edric and Robert were also looking at the gatehouse, and then the gates opened and a solitary figure dressed in black rode through. He blinked. That rider looked familiar. The black rider rode in, shouted something jovial at an approaching Ser Roderick, who bellowed something back, and then Bran recognized him. "Uncle Benjen," he called out, and his uncle looked his way as he dismounted, pulling off his saddlebags with care. "Brienne, how are you, lad?" "Well, thank you," he replied, remembering his manners. He was the Stark in Winterfell after all. Then he looked at his friends. "This is my Uncle Benjen, First Ranger of the Night's Watch." Robert and Edric stared at his uncle, who was striding towards them. "So, Bran, who are your friends?" "This is Robert Arryn, son of Lord Arryn," Bran said, gesturing to Robert, who placed his hand over his heart and bowed. "And this is Edric Storm, natural son of His Grace, King Robert Baratheon, the first of his name." He was quite proud of the fact that he remembered all of them. Edric also bowed formally. Uncle Benjen regarded them all gravely, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. And then he bowed back at them. "Honored to meet you both." Then the smile went away, and he looked around. "I need to talk to your mother, Bran." But all he had to do was look about and then point. Mother was already scurrying towards them, Maester Luwin and Sir Roderick in her wake. "Benjen," Mother said as she approached. "How good to see you again. Ned's on the road to Castle Black, and—" "I saw and spoke to him on the road, Cat," Uncle Benjen said as he kissed her on both cheeks. "And he sends his love, that mission he sent me on." "I succeeded," he said, the last two words with a certain something in his voice that made the other three grown-ups go pale. Mother clutched at her chest for a moment, and then she rallied slightly. "You have a hand?" Uncle Benjen eyed Bran and his friends for a moment. "Something larger, Cat. Winterfell needs to see this. This confirms everything. We need people to see this, even the boys here." "They are too young," Mother protested. "Benjen, how can you suggest such a thing?" "Because winter is coming," his uncle replied in a low and terrible voice. "Ned's right. It'll be a long winter, and we will be fighting back the others at the wall. And if the wall falls, then the next place to rally is Winterfell. A long winter means that these lads here will be men by the time it ends. They need to know what they'll be fighting. They need to know the threat." "Benjen, they are children." Uncle Benjen just looked at Mother. "They need to know, Cat. Not Rickon. He's too young. But the others, they need to know. This is important. This will be their war soon. They will not be children forever. And Brain is old enough now to witness executions. I was when I was his age." There was what appeared to be another debate in the language of the eyebrow for a moment, and then Mother's shoulders slumped and she nodded slowly. Then she paused. "Our Rose son, of Danner and Shaga still here. Sir Roderick. The big man frowned for a moment. "Hey, my lady," he rumbled. "They are. The Vale tribes are moving north to the wall in stages." Lord Stark made it very clear that there not to be any excesses. For some reason, he looked at Bran briefly as he said the last word, as if he had been about to say something else. "Call them to the Great Hall, if you please." "Sir Roderick," Mother ordered with a sigh, "and Arya and Sansa. Domeric, too, and as many of the senior servants as possible. They will all need to see this." And then she turned to a baffled Robert, Edric, and Bran. "Boys, you must come with us. There is something you must see." "Then, is it safe?" "It's in a cage. It's a long story, but the first men made cages to slow the rot on such things, so that it could be taken south to show that they existed." "A wise idea," Maester Luwin muttered, his eyes gleaming a bit. "Cages made from what, though?" "Do you know?" Uncle Benjen muttered as they all walked towards the Great Hall. "I don't know, Luwin. It's an odd color." By the time that a crowd of people had gathered in the Great Hall, Bran's curiosity was afire, as was Robert's and Edric's. Rhea looked irritated, while Sansa and Domeric came in together and seemed to have made up their own language of the eyebrow. The arrival of the two clan chiefs from the Vale always made people stare, if only because Robert's guards always scowled a bit. Before he had left for Castle Blackfather had told Bran that life in the Vale was complicated, and that there had always been war between the mountain clans of the Vale and the Arryns over a war that had been going on for years. However, the clan chiefs had been told by Father that Robert was his ward and therefore a protected guest, and that the Fist of Winter would protect him, and that had been that. Now the two men, one grizzled and slim, the other hulking and bearded, came in, bowed awkwardly, and then stared at Benjen. "For those that do not know him," Mother said loudly, so that the buzz of conversation stilled almost at once, "this is my good brother Benjen Stark, First Ranger of the Night's Watch. Some months ago now, my husband, Lord Stark, gave him a mission." "Benjen?" Uncle Benjen said as he stepped forwards. There was something square on the table in front of him, covered with a black cloth. "Lord Stark commanded me to venture north of the wall and to find a wight, a servant of the others." A wight is a walking corpse, an unnatural thing, animated by the fell magics of the others. Bran blinked at this as the crowd buzzed again. Many had gone pale, although Septon Mordan had gone a funny color, and seemed to be muttering something. "I succeeded," Uncle Benjen said loudly, and silence fell. "I found a wight." Breen stared at his uncle, and then he looked at the square thing, nudged his friends, and pointed. "And I took its head," Uncle Benjen said harshly, before pulling the cloth off the square thing. Underneath was a cage, and in the cage was a human head. He swallowed thickly. Because the eyes of the severed head, had it been a woman, yes, a woman in the cage, were wide open, moving backwards and forwards, whilst the mouth opened and closed as it hissed. There was another moment to utter silence, and then the crowd groaned in shock and horror. Mother was white with shock, but seemed to be rallying. Master Luwin was staring at the head in rapt fascination. Sir Roderick was scowling at it in hatred. Jory Kissal and Nana were holding hands. Sansa had gone as white as a sheet, almost as white as the septa, whilst Domeric just stared at it. Arya was very wide-eyed, and the rest of the crowd were showing a mixture of reactions. As for his friends, Edric's mouth was hanging open in astonishment, whilst Robert had screwed his face up in disgust, and then in thought. And then there was the reaction of the Mountain Clan chiefs. Both were pale, both were trembling, but both were glaring at the severed head with what looked like hate. "The old enemy," he heard Shaga boom. "The true enemy. We fight." But it was the reaction of the direwolves in the room that got everyone's attention. After a moment of staring, they seemed to shake themselves, and then their ears went flat. Their nostrils flared, and then they all threw their heads back and howled, a howl of warning that set his teeth on edge and silenced the hall again. Warning he could hear in that noise. Warning, they come, and then he wondered how he knew that. Jon Arryn, he peered down at the map and sighed tiredly. He was getting stronger, but slowly. Oh, so slowly. That said, he couldn't afford to be tired at the moment. There was too much to do. At least Sir Davos Seaworth was back. True, he was back with confirmation of the astonishing news that was a Godswood on Dragonstone, and that Shireen Baratheon was no longer scarred by grayscale. News that had made Pizzal puff like a leaky bellows as he protested that it all had to be some kind of trick, or foolishness, or the look on the face of Sir Davos had made the old man finally splutter to a halt. He was glad that Seaworth was back in King's Landing and that it had been his son, Devon, who had taken Stannis and his family to White Harbor. Sir Davos was proving to be the exact medicine that the Gold Cloaks needed. He had that right blend of stern but also avuncular leadership. He also set an example with that leadership. And above all, he had an ear to the ground. The small folk of King's Landing were not to be dismissed. He knew that they made up the servants of the city, of the Red Keep, of in fact the realm. And what they knew was priceless at times, especially now. Something was going on at the Great Sept. He had heard of Septon hissing insults at Septon, of Septons sneering at other Septons, division, denial, derision. It was a toxic brew, and one that was bubbling away mightily. It was those bloody statues of the Seven. He knew that it was, ever since the day that the statues had turned to face north, the Septons had been having one long drawn-out shouting match as to the cause of it all. He had men picked by Quill, watching the Great Sept. There could be no hint of the return of the Faith Militant. Not now. The problem was that he had no idea what the toxic mess that was brewing would result in. The map drew his eyes again, and he sighed a little. The unrest seemed to be dying in some places and flaring up in others like a forest fire that was being constantly hit by light showers. It was worrying. He just hoped that Hoster Tully had a better grasp of things than it seemed at the moment. Reports from River Run said that his good father had not been well recently. A knock on the door drew his attention to the entrance, and he looked up to see Quill standing there. "Yes, what is it, Quill?" "Beg pardon, my lord, but there are reports of a disturbance at the Great Sept." "Of course there were." He sighed and straightened his tunic slightly. "Very well. Saddle my horse. It seems that I need to have a little word with the High Septon." "Very well, my lord," and Quill strode off quickly. Jon sighed again and then looked out of the window. He could see the top of the Great Sept from here, and he almost cursed the place. He should have taken a leaf out of Tywin Lannister's book and installed a more reliable High Septon. The current one was a fat idiot who bent like a twig at the slightest breeze. He read a few reports tiredly, wondered vaguely if he would ever be free of this weariness, and then nodded and stood when Quill returned to tell him that his horse was ready. Gale was indeed ready, a fast but patient horse, and the latest in a long line of horses that he had ridden at various times. Quill had organized a strong escort, using some of the extra men that had recently come in from the Vale and who were loyal only to House Arryn. They surrounded him as he rode out of the Red Keep and then down into the stink of the city. The Great Sept was a bit of a ride away, and he had always wondered if the Targaryens had planned it that way, to keep the faith of the Seven at arm's length, to make it very clear that whilst the king followed the teachings of the Seven, he would not take any nonsense from them. As they approached the Great Sept, he frowned a little. A rider had been sent ahead to tell of his approach, and that rider had returned to tell Quill that the High Septon had been deep in conclave with his senior priests, but that he would of course welcome the acting hand. But as he rode towards the doors to the great building, he could see that there was no one there, not even a guard. "Do not dismount," he told his guards softly as they halted at the doors. Unease prickled at him. Something is wrong here. And then one of the doors opened, and the High Septon stumbled out. Jon opened his mouth to ask where in the name of the seven hells he had been, and then he stopped. The fat man's clothing was disordered. His hair was disheveled, and there was a look of shock on his face. "High Septon," he called. "Are you well?" The High Septon looked at him slowly, took a shambling sort of step in his direction, and then he fell forward, smashing into the stone flagstones with a terrible force, like a puppet whose strings had been cut. And in the middle of his back, where the clothing was almost black with blood, was a knife. Blood was now running across the flagstones, and he could tell at a glance that the wretched man was dead. There was a sudden shocked pause, and then every man around Jon drew his sword and glared around. Someone to side screamed, and with that, small crowd of small folk started to gather. It was at that point that the doors to the Great Sept creaked open again, and this time a small crowd of Septons hurried out. They were led by a short man in a robe that had more than a few streaks of blood. And Jon could tell at a glance that this man was trouble. His face was pale, his eyes were glassy with madness, and he had a knife in his hand. "So die all enemies of the faith!" The man screamed and then kicked at the body of the High Septon. "Brethren, We are victorious. A cheer went up, mostly coming from the parts of the crowd that were just as glassy-eyed as the man with the knife. And what, Jon roared at them, suddenly almost too angry for words, is going on here? Who are you? What have you done? The madman stopped kicking the dead High Septon and then stared at Jon. His mouth worked for a moment, and then he pointed at him. Brethren, look who the seven themselves have given up to us. The traitor Jon Arryn, the man who has been consorting with the pagans of the north, the man who would have us grovel before trees, he must be a pagan himself. Surely. There was a growl from the Septons, albeit a slightly uncertain one, and Quill and two others danced their horses to in front of Jon protectively. I am no pagan, Jon said eventually, through clenched teeth. I follow the seven, but the people of the north are not your enemies, and the statues of the seven did not warn of them, but of something else. Naught but lies, the Septon screamed at him. The seven demand a war, a holy war, against the pagans of the north, and we shall give it to them. Jon sighed and drew his own sword. No, he said sadly. You will not. He could hear horsemen approach at a canter, but he did not dare look to see who they were. Instead, his gaze was on this murdering religious lunatic. He should have kept a better eye on the great Sept. The crowd of Septons took a step towards Jon and his escort, and he peered at the people behind the lunatic. Some of them looked as if they were having second thoughts. Others looked as raving mad as the Septon with the knife. Speaking of which, the man was now pointing at Jon. This man, he raved, is a defender of pagans, a defender of their tree gods. He must die now. No, said a rather familiar voice behind Jon. He must not. You, on the other hand, are a rabid twat-waffle, and you'll not be missed much. And with those words came the solid twang of a crossbow, and all of a sudden there was a bolt sticking out between the eyes of the madman with a knife. He had just enough time to look astonished before collapsing in a boneless heap next to the body of the High Septon. There was a ratcheting noise, and then Bronn Castle rode forwards at the head of a grim-faced knot of men, pulling back the drawstring of the crossbow that he was carrying. Any more volunteers for martyrdom? It's very cheap, just a quick bolt between the eyes. He completed his resetting of the drawstring, dropped the bolt into place, and then aimed a rather worrying smile at the Septons. There was a moment of absolute shocked silence, and then the doors to the Great Sept opened again. This time the man who came out at the head of another group of Septons was the gray-haired second in command of the previous and unlamented High Septon, a man called Greenstone. He was carrying what appeared to be the blood-stained leg of a chair, and he looked as if he was about to explode with rage. Then he saw the bodies and the horsemen. He said after a long moment. I see that justice has been done. Then he bowed in the direction of Jon. My Lord Arryn, I apologize for this. Certain doctrinal differences, shall we say, got rather out of hand. My colleagues here will soon return to the fold, or face similar consequences. The first group of Septons, or at least those who could count and then realize that they were not just outnumbered, but also faced a group of men armed with swords and at least one crossbow, shuddered, and then put down what passed for their weapons. The few holdouts were disarmed. Thank you, Acting High Septon, Jon called out at Greenstone, who looked a bit startled for a moment before nodding seriously in his direction. Please let me know if you need any assistance in restoring order to the Great Sept. Greenstone glared at the few Septons who looked as if they were about to make trouble. Perhaps a few men with crossbows. I feel the need to have some lessons taught to some here. And that was it. The Septons seemed to have everything under control, so Jon turned Gale with a few nudges from his feet and then rode back up the hill towards the Red Keep, gesturing for Bronn to approach as they rode. I hear you found my wife. I did at that, or rather she fell into my lap. Her party were wandering about, looking for a maester to treat her infected arm. What did you have smeared on that blade of your my lord? He smiled thinly. My father taught me well. Oh, I'll not deny that. He must have taught you very well. He paused. Your wife's servants twigged what had happened eventually. I've got them all at the foxhold. Couldn't bring her, though. My maester said that the journey might kill her. Taking her arm off at the shoulder, not an easy thing. Any word from the foxhold? None, which means that she still lives. Good. If you couldn't bring her here, why did you come? Bronn looked about idly at the crowd of people, gawking. We need a private place for that. He nodded in reply. The Tower of the Hand? I don't trust that place. Too many odd little holes in the ceilings of too many rooms. Good, if worrying point. Then where? Bronn looked about idly and then pointed at a small tavern to one side. Jon nodded, told Quill to keep a close eye out for spies, and then cantered up to the place, with Bronn just behind him, and dismounted. Getting hold of the common room cost him a dragon, but it was empty and did not contain small holes anywhere at all. Bronn entered, nodded with every appearance of satisfaction, and then pulled him close so that he could whisper in his ear, "Your wife had a letter from Peter Baelish on her possession, in a locked box." Dread gnawed at his heart for a long moment. "And what did it say?" Bronn looked about the room again for a moment. "Saying," he said in a very low whisper indeed, "that the king's children are not his own, but rather that of her own brother." There was another long moment. Then Jon swallowed. "Do you have this letter?" "I have." He pulled out a leather folder with a lot of intricate stitching that held it closed. "And I give it all up to you. I'll not have Foxhold razed to the ground by Tywin Bloody Lannister." Jon took the letter as his mind whirled. Was this the only such letter? What if there had been more? What else was out there about the king's great matter? "This letter," he started to say, only to be interrupted. "Letter? What letter?" "I know nothing of any letter, my lord." Jon looked the former sellsword for a long moment. "Good man," he said, eventually. "Tell me, is there anything you need from me?" Another pause, and then, "I understand that my steward is the natural daughter of the former lord of the Foxhold. Could she be legitimized? Can I ask why?" "She was there when your wife arrived, and we read a certain piece of paper together. She can keep her mouth shut. I would like to see her rewarded." He looked at Bronn carefully. Yes, he was no longer a sellsword. "I will see it done. Thank you, my lord." "Tell me something, Bronn. Why is it that you always seem to be in the right place at the right time?" "Trouble tends to seek me out and tweak my nose for a dare, my lord." And with that, Jon laughed for what felt like the first time in a very long time. Myrcella. So far, the North was not what she had been expecting. Mother had told them all that the North was a savage place, filled with pagans and wild animals. So far, White Harbor had not been any of that. The white walls were everywhere. The harbor was large and efficient, and it seemed to be a true city in every sense of the word. And she had to admit that it was a lot less stinky than King's Landing. That said, there were things that she did not understand. The fact that the people of White Harbor were so intent on something that she didn't understand was one thing. They seemed to be convinced that winter was coming, for a start. Yes, it was colder than King's Landing, but not cold enough for snow. It was confusing. Why were they so certain? They all seemed to be so busy. Preparing, growing, sowing, barreling, bottling. The entire city was buzzing, and there was an awful lot of talk about sending help to the wall. She watched everything from the walls of the new castle. Mother appeared to be in a permanent rage, whilst Father was ranging about the place, sometimes with what looked like half a tree on his shoulders again. Father had changed a lot these past few weeks. He was no longer the slightly morose, but often angry man that she had become used to. The man who would just grunt at her in the mornings when they broke their fast together. Now, Father would smile at her and make jokes and comment on how pretty her hair looked. He'd joke with Tommen too, like a great bear playing with a small cub. He didn't treat Joffrey any differently, though. There was something there, a layer of reserve between those two. If she didn't know better, she could have sworn that Father didn't trust her brother. Good. Joffrey. He wasn't right. There was something very wrong with him at times, something that he tried to hide. Worse, he thought that he was succeeding in hiding it. "Princess," she started slightly at the unexpected voice and then turned. Rosella Manderley was standing there. She was odd. She had blonde eyebrows, but she had dyed her hair green. It looked a bit peculiar, and there was something about her that puzzled Mercilessly. The other girl had a high, thin voice, but there was something about her that seemed very well deep. "Hello, Ella. Would you like a tour of the new castle? You and Prince Tommen." "Tommen?" She looked around confused, and then she saw her brother as he ambled into view, a rather large and slightly confused cat in his arms. "Myrcella," he burst out when he saw her, before striding up to her. "Look at the size of this kitty. I shall ask Father to knight him as Cirque Sleepy." "My prince, his name is Jasper," Willa said. "And he seems to like you. Normally he scratches strangers." "How odd. This is normally his time to take a nap. Or 3. Tommen had also started a bit at hearing the voice of the green-haired girl. But then he relaxed a bit. "He is a bit heavy," he conceded. Perhaps I should put him down. Yes, Tommen, Myrcella said with a smile. Then she remembered her manners. A tour of the new castle, Lady Wella. I would be very glad to see your home. Eyeing Tommen out of the corner of her eye, she paused. Wouldn't we, Tommen? Tommen was watching the retreating form of Jasper with a certain amount of sadness, but then jerked upright. We would? Oh yes. Of course. Wigula Manderly turned out to be a good guide. She showed them all around the new castle, explaining all the various parts of it, and being especially proud of the point where both harbors could be seen, something that surprised both Tommen and herself. There are 2 harbors? Tommen asked, astonished. The layout of White Harbor is deceptive, Willa Manderly told them, with a slightly odd look on her face. It has surprises. The last thing that she showed them was the Septa. A very beautiful place indeed, with a set of statues of the 7 that made her pause to reflect on their nature. Your Septa is very lovely, Tommen muttered, awestruck. I know, but I don't pray here anymore, Willa admitted quietly. Not anymore. Myrcella was about to ask why when they all heard the sound of boots on flagstones. And then she cringed internally as Joffrey swept in, Sandor Clegane just behind him. Her brother was wearing a new cloak, rich red with black fur around the shoulders. His hands were gloved. He seemed to like gloves a lot these days, but there was still that look of angry petulance on his face. There you are, Joffrey drawled as he looked about the sept. How quaint. Prince Joffrey, Willa bobbed briefly into a curtsy. I was just showing the princess and the prince about the new castle. Yes, Joffrey said curtly. Your father has given me a tour as well. Odd that your grandfather isn't here. He is at Castle Black, my prince. He should have been here to greet my father, the king. The distances were too great. This seemed to annoy Joffrey, but he seemed to rein it back after a long moment. So, this is your sept, he said, eventually. Where you pray? You are unique amongst the great houses of the north, I believe. You pray to the true gods. Oh, 7 hells, but she remained quiet. Joffrey was in one of his tiresome moods today. He was best appeased and then avoided. She didn't want to see his nasty streak come out. Willa Manderly looked at Joffrey until he seemed to become restive and shift from one foot to the other. Only then did she speak. Most of my family pray to the 7 here, my prince. I and a few others do not. There is another sept. No, my prince, we pray to the old gods. At the Heart Tree in the Wolf's Den, the old citadel of White Harbor. There is a heart tree here? A true one? Joffrey sounded surprised and mocking as well. Yes, my prince. I would see it. Never seen a real heart tree. Show me. I command you. Rula said nothing for a moment, but then curtsied again. Then follow. We will need to warn the guards there. Why? Because the Wolf's Den is now a prison. But that is where the heart tree is. Sandor Clegane went before them to the old keep, despite the fact that Wella Manderly had indeed sent a message ahead of them. The Wolf's Den had black walls that did not look in good repair, but which still stood. And it looked ancient, old beyond words. Inside was a god's wood, a true one. Not like the one at the Red Keep back home at King's Landing, a real one. White trunks of weirwood trees, red leaves, and in the middle, a huge tree with a carved face. The heart tree, just looking at it, made her shiver a little. Wella Manderly walked up to the tree and then placed a hand on it. I have prayed here every day since I heard the call, as have others. My new cousins come here too. New cousins? Myrcella was about to ask about that when all of a sudden Joffrey snorted with derision. The call? That mummery? There was no call. I doubt that it happened. I heard nothing. Tommen was suddenly staring at his feet, his face turning more than a little red, and she knew in that moment that he had heard at least something. She did indeed still feel that odd pull north, but she also knew that they could not say anything to Joffrey that might gainsay what he had just said. Joffrey could be cruel at times. I heard it, my prince, Willa Manderly said scornfully. I heard it loud. The others come. The Stark calls for aid. You are needed. It was heard throughout White Harbor. It was heard throughout the north. Joffrey looked at her and then at the heart tree, his face working. Mummery, he repeated angrily. Mummery. Truth. Willa Manderly said in calm response. Nothing but truth. The call was sent out. We have answered it. The blood of the first men is strong here. We Manderleys may have come here as refugees from the Reach, but we still hear the old songs of our ancestors, and we heard the call. Magic returns, as was foretold. You should know of that. Confused, she looked at Tommen and then at Joffrey. Foretold? Joffrey asked, playing with the glove on his right hand as if something pained him. Rosair Landerly placed both hands on the heart tree. Storms break at storm's end, she intoned, in a voice that seemed deep and strange. Brain built it well. When the sword wakes at storm's end, storm kings will as well. And then she turned quickly and looked at them, and for a moment Myrcella thought that she could see something red in her eyes. Ed. It was very quiet in the trees as they rode north. A bit too quiet for his liking. In fact, he didn't like this whole mission. The first ranger had been very clear in his orders, before he'd gone off south with that White's head. He wasn't sure what was worse, going south with a rotting head or going north to look for something that he didn't know even existed. They said that the head was in cage, that would slow the rot. However, no one knew how. It was a cage. He shivered a little, and then pulled his cloak a little closer. Weights. There were weights out there. Weights, and possibly worse than weights. As they rode, he looked about carefully. Ser Jerry Racker led the 10 men, and he wasn't bad. Not as good as the half-hand or the first ranger, but not bad. The half-hand was said by many to be the best, but he'd bet on the first ranger, Benjen Stark, had a way about him. He could be a bit dour at times, but he knew his business when the boot met the shit and went squish. There was a break in the trees ahead, and he caught his first glimpse of the fist of the first man on this trip. It loomed on the horizon like a fist. The first man called a spade, and in this case, a fist. He wondered for a long moment why they had abandoned it, and then shook the thought off. One of the supply horses lagged slightly, and he checked that it was all right. Just a tussock underfoot. He eyed the tussock carefully. What might a white look like under snow or branches? Then he looked back at the trees. No sign of any hooded men on elk either. That was an odd one, The first ranger had been bloody clear about that, too. This cold hands was to be left alone. Whatever he was. On they went, and soon the hills by the fist started to loom. He eyed them as well. He'd ridden past them before. To think that this overlook place had always been there was, well, it was vexing. They rode on, and before the sun had passed too far overhead, they were riding down a small valley, with Sir Jeremy carefully consulting a little map that had been drawn by the first ranger. This way, he said eventually, and then led them further down the valley, towards a great cliff. This was mad. There was nothing there, was there? But then he noticed that there was a cleft in that cliff, and before he knew it, they were trotting through old gates and into a cave beyond it. He stared in astonishment. It was just as the first ranger had described it, almost a stable, with a passageway heading off. They had brought torches and lamp oil, but Sir Jeremy was cautious as he led and 5 others up the stairs, leaving the others to unload the horses. The gates were open. Anything and anyone could have wandered in here. We search as we go up, along the passageway and then up the spiral stairs that led up. Every nerve stretched as they watched and listened for anything at all. Nothing. Up to another doorway and then a room beyond that, filled with light. He stared at that. There was a wall with holes in it, filled with some kind of crystal. The sun was shining through. And there were passageways off the room. 2 other rooms as well, one some kind of barracks and the other an office with a desk. The barracks had bed frames that seemed to be made from weirwood, as they were still strong. As for the passageway, it led to another stairway. This one headed down to a round room. It was warm there, with a pool fed by a warm spring that bubbled up from one corner of it. Oh, and there was a line of privies to one side. He peered down one. It smelt like water, perhaps an underground river or something. Smelled nothing like a privy, in other words. By the time that he trudged back up to the main room with the wall with holes, Sir Jeremy was in something of a taking. That this place should have been lost from memory. 'Tis perfect for the watch. What a treasure for rangers. I, Darwin muttered to one side. I've ridden past here many a time before, and I remember many a brother who died of injury or cold, not far from this place, who might have been saved if I had known of it. How could it have been lost? 'Tis the doom of men that we forget, Ed pointed out quietly. Time, pestilence, men being secretive, it all adds up. It's been a long time since anyone was here. Then let us make the best of it, Sir Jeremy said very firmly. Let's get the supplies up here. I want the bedding laid down and a meal prepared. This was once a base for the Rangers. It shall be again. He peered at the sunlight outside. According to the first Ranger, this cold hands mentioned caches on the fist of the first men. The Lord Commander wants to know what those caches are and why the others would be on the fist. Weapons that could be used, perhaps? We have a job to do. Oberyn. He put the message down and then scowled at the nearest wall. Every time that he thought that he had found firm ground again under his feet, what with all the news of the stony Dornish going north, a long winter being on the horizon, and his daughters being their usual unruly selves, something happened to knock him off balance yet again. This time it was this news from Pentas. It was confirmed. It was all confirmed. Latapis was dead, which was a shame. The man's greed could be used to make him willingly jump through all kinds of hoops. Viserys Targaryen was dead as well, which was actually a good thing, given that he seemed to have been as raving mad as his father at the end. He had never mourned for that madman. Their vengeance was for his sister and her children. And now that vengeance was delayed, but not forgotten. Never forgotten, not Alia. One day, he would sit back and watch as Tywin Lannister choked out his last breath in front of him. Oh, and Daenerys Targaryen had somehow hatched 3 dragons. Odd that. 3 people seemed to have died, and 3 dragons had been born from a terrible fire. There had to be a link. 3 dragons. Daenerys Targaryen would be a power one day. If she lived that long, dragons took their time in growing. It was worth pondering on. Sighing, he turned and left the room, passing down the long corridor outside that led to the water gardens. He did love this place, but coming here always left him with a pang of sadness. Atsalia had liked it as well. Hearing the sound of clashing blades, he looked over to one side. Tywin was sparring with Abara. Judging by the smirk on the latter's face, his younger daughter was still learning how to use the spear properly. Watch your feet, Tywin, he chided her gently. Fighting with a spear demands a different stance and way of balancing yourself. I've told her that, father, Oberyn grinned. She never listens to me. If we were fighting with daggers, then I would have won 3 times by now, Tywin snapped. Maybe, Obara scoffed, but not likely. You are too impulsive, sister. I'll show you impulsive. And with that, she launched a flurry of attacks with her spear against her sister. But he could see at once that Obara was going to win this one. Her stance was better. She parried more crisply, and above all, she didn't overbalance. Within a heartbeat, Tywin was on the ground, winded from a blow to the stomach from the butt of Obara's spear. He looked at her carefully and then smiled as he helped her up. Tywin, you need to think a little more before you move, he told her, and watch your feet. Yes, father. Tywin gasped as she rubbed at her stomach and then glared at her sister, who raised an eyebrow and then smirked at her. After her moment of triumph, Obara looked at him. Father, you have Tywin learning the spear, me learning the bow, and Nymeria learning the daggers. Why? Oberyn smiled at his daughter. Because all of a sudden I think that we should all treat a day when we do not learn something new as a day wasted. His smile faded a little. This is important, daughters. We must all change the way that we do things, the way that we think. We must learn new things, fight in new ways. Something is coming. Something dark and terrible, and Dorne will not be untouched by it. We must have our eyes on the horizon, our eyes on the threat. The exact shape of it is not yet visible, but it is there, and we must prepare. They both stared at him for a long moment, and then they both brought their spears up before them and formally saluted him. Yes, father, they chorused. After kissing them both on the forehead, he left them there, sparring and snarking at each other again. The water garden stretched on ahead, a very beautiful place indeed. Doran's location was signaled by the hulking presence of Areo Hota, who seemed to be trying to suppress some kind of emotion. He nodded at the man, and then discovered what was affecting the man. Doran Martell, his brother, was standing. He was wincing a bit as he rocked back and forwards, but he was standing. Oberyn must have made some kind of shocked noise, because Doran turned towards him and then waved a finger in his direction. I hold you responsible for this, brother. This is all your fault, and I am annoyed. The words were sheer madness, and he paused to run them through his mind again for a moment. Then he finally said, What? And this brought a clap of the hands of delight from his brother, followed by a laugh, the like of which he had not heard from Doran in quite some time. To see your face, Oberyn Martell, at a loss. Mother would have cried laughing. Doran shook his head. You recommended that clever young maester to me, young Robb is. He has made a study of gout, you said. Try and listen to him, you said. Well, I did, and this... He shuffled a few steps. There was still some discomfort in his face, but nothing more. The pain is not as bad, Oberyn asked. Not as bad, Doran replied. Oh, I can stand and walk, but I cannot run. Rosiax told me to stop drinking the finest red wines and move to other lighter ones. He gave me a list of things I should avoid eating. How the stomach and the feet are connected, he did not say, but his advice has helped me, and he has some herbs for me. He absorbed this and then nodded in a baffled manner. Well, good. Wait, why are you annoyed? Doran rolled his eyes as if he had said something stupid, because all the things I should not eat are the things that I truly love to eat. Reborn looked his brother up and down. Too bad. It's worth it to see you on your feet again. His brother nodded, somberly, this time. Yes, I need to be on my feet. I need to get fit again. Too much time in that chair. Too much time getting soft and flabby from the pain. No more, brother. No more. Sunspear will see me again. He looked at Doran and then nodded. And when you are ready, we will get you back in fighting trim. There is much to do, my brother. Much to do. Benjen! He sat in the Godswood and stared at the heart tree. He had a decision to make, and he needed to make it soon. He shouldn't be here. He needed to be on the road. But in which direction? He should be headed south, either to White Harbor or to Moat Cailin, and then onwards. But he had the oddest feeling that he was needed somewhere else. North, on the wall. He ran a hand over his beard and then looked at the carved face on the tree. Give me a sign, he whispered. Where should I go, south or north? And what about the cage with the head of the white? But if the old gods responded to him, then it was lost in the sounds of wind and leaf above him. He sighed, stood, and then strode off. There were some workmen in the scaffolding around the lower half of the broken tower, and he wondered yet again about why that scaffolding wasn't taller yet. To one side he could see Cat talking to the terrible threesome again. By the look of them, they weren't in trouble, just being told about something instead of being lectured about what they shouldn't do. A smile crossed his face as memories bubbled up. Memories of the old days, with Brandon, Lyanna, and Ned. Then the smile slipped. That had been before the dark days. Before the rebellion. First Ranger! He half turned to see old Sir Roderick striding towards him. He suspected that he would be doing a lot more about Winterfell in the wake of young Jory's upcoming wedding. From what Benjen could see of the lad and his wife-to-be from the Vale and how affectionate they were to each other then, well, they would be. Well, if she didn't give birth 9 months after the wedding, then it wouldn't be from lack of trying. Apparently Jory had a lot of ardor, and Anna had a lot of appreciation of such ardor. Judging from the way that the two were looking at each other all the time, and right now Benjen needed to not think about that attractive maid with the great big... Damn it, what was wrong with him? Sir Roderick, anything wrong? A group of men from the Night's Watch has arrived. Recruiters headed back to the wall. I mentioned that you were here to their leader. He expressed a desire to speak with you. He frowned a little. What's his name? Yoren. Truly? He grinned, and then strode off to the main gates, where he could see a very familiar figure. Yoren, you old rogue. And he embraced his old friend, thumping his back, and then stepping back and looking him up and down. Damn it, man, have you been... Busy, First Ranger, busy. Yoren jabbed a thumb over his shoulder. Come and see who my lads have got. Lads? You normally fly alone as a wandering crow. I bumped into 2 more of us on the road. Doran and Conwy. And with that, he pointed. Benjen gaped a little. There had to be almost 150 men in the courtyard, most armed and the rest with horses and provisions. I know that things had changed with Ned sending out of the call, but... So many... Yoren gave him an odd look. Lord Stark sent out the call? He did. Where were you when you heard it? Lannisport almost shit myself. Fortunately, I was on the privy at the time. And yes, so many. Some want to take the black, others just want to help. Never known the like before. Ooh, there's more, Benjen said grimly. Yoren, I've been north of the wall these past weeks. I've seen whites. Killed whites, too. His friend stared at him as if he was looking deep inside him. Whites, he said eventually. You've seen whites. I have. There are those to the south who will need proof. I have the proof. I have the head of a white in a cage. Our ancestors were wiser than us. Yoren. They built cages that were enchanted to slow the rot so that proof of whites could be sent south. And then something seemed to slot home within his mind, like a key turning. I was going to go south with it, but a feeling has grown on me that I am needed on the wall again. Your face is well known south of the neck as a wandering crow. Would that cage be better in your hands than in mine? Bjorn and Conway could take your recruits north. I feel as if I need to ride north today. Yoren stared at him again. Ahead of a white, that could get the watch even more recruits. He nodded. Give me that cage, Benjen. I know lords in the south that would quail before it. He grinned at his friend, slapped him on the shoulder, and then took off at a dead run. He had a lot to do, and a maid to catch as well. Sorella. She woke up slowly. Everything seemed to be fuzzy about the edges, as if she was waking up after a night of very heavy drinking. Only she had not been drinking. She frowned. Where was she? The last thing she remembered was riding next to the wall, her cloak half around her head, feeling so very cold, and then oddly warm and then fuzzy, and that was it. She looked about. She was on a bed, a rather distressed-looking bed. But a bed. She had a lot of furs piled on top of her, and some oddly warm things were to either side of her. She poked at them carefully. Stones, warm stones, wrapped in cloth. I see that you are awake, said a voice to one side. She looked over. There was a large fire going at a hearth, and Tyrion Lannister was standing at it, warming his hands. Good. You had us worried. Any headache? Headache? Confused. She shook her head. No. Who are you? He tilted his head at her and looked at her with a mirthful eye. You know very well who I am. You've been following us for the past 2 days now. Until you fell off your horse, that is. My son and I would like to know why. That said, I have my suspicions. You are Tyrion Lannister? I am. You're supposed to be dead. I got better. She opened her mouth for a moment and then coughed roughly. Do you have any water? Better than that. Soup. Olyrian is getting it now. Where are we? Rimgate. The castle isn't in as bad a state as we thought, judging by the stacked stones and limber someone's been working on this place. We met a few volunteers in Long Barrow who said that they'd been working on repairs all along the wall. And they built this place well. This is the room of the commander of the castle, in the old days. And it will be again. I think. She eyed him carefully. After a moment, the door creaked open, and the boy came in. He was holding a small copper cauldron, with a cloth around the carrying handle. From the steam that came off it, and that amazing smell, here was the soup. The boy placed a ladle into the cauldron, and used it to transfer some of the hot liquid into 3 rough bowls, one of which he handed over to her, along with a spoon. The soup was lumpy and filled with carrots and some kind of root vegetable. She didn't give a damn because it was warm and filling and gave a feeling of heat inside her. She slurped down every scrap of it and then lay back down. She felt better. Less cold. I still don't understand what happened to me. Tyrion Lannister looked at her owlishly. You're Dornish, he said, as if they explained everything. Then he saw her baffled look and sighed a little. This is the north. This is not the lands beyond the wall. But this is the wall, and this is the north, and this place is colder than anywhere you have ever been in your life. Yes. You bought a lot of clothes at Eastwatch by the sea. That doesn't mean that they were necessarily the right clothes, or that you wore them the right way. You've been cold ever since you came here, I'll guess, and that you didn't ask anyone about clothing here. She stared at him again. You might be right, she said reluctantly, but surely, too much wool soaks up sweat. It's not good for you when it's very cold, but you're being active. You need furs and wool in the right order here. I once came to the north to escort the son of an old friend of mine to the wall. I learnt a lot then. I passed it on to my son. I'm not sure that he believed me at first. He grinned at his son, who looked a bit abashed. But he does now. Yes, father, the boy said dryly. You were quite right. And then he directed a green-eyed look at her that made her feel as if she was being intently studied. Tyrion Lannister poured her another bowl of soup, and then looked at her as well. Then he smiled slightly. So then, what's your name? Olivas, she eventually said through a mouthful of hot soup. I'm studying to be a maester. The man and the boy swapped looks. Original, Tyrion Lannister said after a long moment. Because when we found you by your horse and picked you up, you slurred that you were called Sorella. I wasn't in my right mind, she said after a moment. And your voice was higher, Allarian said. Not deliberately pitched lower, like it is now. That was the cold. Give it up, girl, Tyrion Lannister said kindly. You have given it a good go, but the time for subterfuge is past. The more I look at you, the more I realize that I know why you have been following us. You are Dornish with something else. Summer Islands, I think. Your eyes, the shape of them, are familiar. Same as your nose, I think, and your hair. My home is on the Summer Islands, and I hear things. The tale of a female ship captain who was seduced by one Oberyn Martell, the Red Viper of Dorne, is one such thing. And the fact that he had a daughter with her is another such thing. You are that daughter, I think, Sorella Sand. Oh, stop that girl. I see your fists balling under the furs. We will keep your secret. Women this close to the wall are rare, although less rare than they used to be, and are to be protected. The Night's Watch, I've recently heard, is more than it recently used to be, more than the dregs that were sent to the wall. But enough of those old dregs are still there to worry me a bit. His face stilled. I am not my brother, he said forcefully. Tywin and I grew up watching our father make mistake after mistake after mistake. He was a weak man, our father, but Tywin responded by overly strong. There were times when he confused cruelty with strength. I know that now. He placed his family over what was right, and what happened to your aunt was not right. She stared at him for a long moment, before closing her mouth with a slight snap. You are a very odd man, Tyrion Lannister. You see well, for a Lannister. I am now a Lannister of the Summer Islands, and I see far further than my brother. You're following us, because I am a man that your father thinks is dead. But why were you in the north at all? My father sent me. The Stony Dornish have been sending help to the wall. He would know why. So would my uncle, Prince Doran. Tyrion Lannister looked at the ceiling for a moment, and then at the floor, and then at his son, who raised an eyebrow at his father. You did not feel it then? Allarian asked. Feel what? The call. What call? The call north. It's why we're here. It's something others have heard. I heard it in my dreams. The others come. The Stark calls for aid. You are needed. Father said that we were going to Winterfell at first, but then our destination changed. The wall instead. The Night Fort. Precisely. The Night Fort? Why there? Tyrion looked at his father, who smiled slightly. I dreamt that we needed to be there. Now, rest. Sleep. We start in the morning, and with that they both left, closing the door behind them. She stared at the door, and then at the ceiling. Well, she had come for answers to Father's questions. Perhaps she'd finally found a place where she'd get those answers. He woke up at dawn, stretched in bed, and then stared at the stone ceiling. He'd had the best night's sleep that he'd had in ages. That probably meant that something bad was going to happen today. He had a feeling about these things. So with a sigh, he got his things together and went down to the bathing area to have a quick scrub. The water was warm without being too warm. The soap lathered nicely, and all in all, he had a thoroughly enjoyable wallow. He was drying himself on a rough blanket and dressing when the others started trickling down. Even Tywin came down, and he was a man not noted for being particularly clean at times. Jeremy went down last. Of all, and only when Ed came up from the bathing chambers. He was a good man. The men came first, especially of late. It was as if he had become aware of just what had changed of late. After breaking their fast quickly, they went down to the horses, saddled them, and then opened the gates and rode out. They left one man as a guard, with orders to close the gates and wait for their return. There's something out there, Sir Jeremy muttered to him as they rode for the Fist of the First Men. I feel it in my bones. Not close, but out there. Ed shivered a little and watched the horizon a little more attentively than before. And Sir Jeremy was right. He felt it too. The closer to the Fist they got, the more he marveled at it. The walls were broken in many places, but once they had been tall, wind, snow, and the years of the ages had brought them low. But once this had been a strong place. As he dismounted, he stared at the surrounding landscape. Bleak wasn't the word. I wonder why they came here, Daewin asked as he joined Ed in staring at the view. He thought about that for a long moment. I think that they were afraid, Ed said seriously. There's nothing here to defend. No towns, no cities, no villages, no roads or rivers. No, they came here to get away from something, and I'm not sure that it worked. Why do you think that then? Why else would they have built the wall? A good point, Tullet, Sir Jeremy said quietly before hefting one of the staves they were all carrying. Right then, We're looking for caches. So we'll use the staves to probe the snow, form a line, a foot apart, and probe. Probe and walk. It made for a very dull morning. For first an hour and then another hour, by the path of the sun, they probed. And found nothing. Apart from a moment of excitement when Gerald found a skull, they all paused to view it suspiciously. But it seemed to be just a skull. And then they kept at it. What would a cache look like anyway? Ed grunted as he stabbed the snow with his stave, found nothing, stepped forwards and stabbed again. But this time his stave went clunk as his hit something about a foot below the snow. What the seven hells is that? Dywin muttered. Ed sank down and swept the snow to one side with his hands. After a moment, he felt something. Stone. Worked stone. Sir Jeremy, I've found something. The knight was by his side in an instant. As they all started to pull at the snow, Jarl pulled out a shovel from his backpack and they let him work for a moment. What emerged from the snow was a round capstone, and it was covered in runes. They all stared at it for a long moment. And that, brothers, said Sir Jeremy, is a bloody cache. Right, get that capstone up. Roll one. I want you to copy those runes in the best drawing you can manage. Record it all. Tullet, you found it. You open it. He nodded and then, with the others, pulled the capstone up. It weighed a bloody ton, but they got it up and off so that Ro could brush the snow off and then start to copy the runes. Maester Aemon and the First Ranger had been very clear at that. Any runes were to be copied. Which just left the cache. He reached down and scrabbled. Yes, there was something there. A bundle. He pulled it up. It's a cloak, he muttered as he stared at it. A cloak of a brother of the Night's Watch, too. Placing it on the ground in front of him, he stared at it, and then he undid the rotted leather straps that bound it. Something clinked inside it, and as he opened it, stone ground upon stone. Dragonglass, he muttered, as the contents were revealed. It's all dragonglass. Dragonglass knives, Sir Jeremy corrected as he picked one up. It had old leather wrapped about the bottom of it. Then he pulled out another one, and spear points. Look at this! Look at it all, brothers. These are weapons to be used against the others. This is what we're looking for. Keep probing. There must be more. They kept at it this time with more heart. Hour after hour, as the sun passed overhead, they found a cache just before noon when they had some bread and cheese, and another just after noon, both containing dragonglass weapons. Look at this stone. It must have taken hours of work to get it like this, Ed muttered as he fingered one spear point that had caught his fancy. The colors were amazing. Black, then red, then almost as clear as glass. What with chipping or napping it? Hours. They made it for a purpose, Sir Jeremy muttered as he looked at the horizon. And a brother of ours thought it important enough to bury here. Keep looking. They kept looking. One more cache was found, this one empty, and then nothing for a long time. Finally, as the sun started to sink down to the horizon, they found one more. And like the first one, it was Ed, whose stave thumped against stone in the discovery of it. Once again their hands discovered a cover stone, and once again he pulled out a bundle that had once been the cloak of a brother of the Night's Watch. It had dragonglass in it, but this time it also had something else. A horn, and a well-worked one, with what looked like silver bound around it at both ends, and there were runes on those silver bands. Sir Jeremy stared down at it for a long moment. This is important, he growled. I know not why, I just feel it. Call it? Sir Jeremy? You'll get this to Maester Aemon. You understand? Aye, Sir Jeremy. They all stood up, the silence broken only by the scratch of Roland's pen, and Sir Jeremy looked about at where they had left their tracks. We've done our job today, brothers. We're covered everything here. Back to the overlook. Now. The sun's setting, and there's something out there. I can feel it. Replace the cover stones, cover them in snow, erase our tracks as much as we can, and then we ride. He was right. Ed could feel it. That sensation that someone or something was out there was getting stronger, and he joined the others in covering and smoothing before they got on their horses and trotted, and then galloped down from the fist. Back down over the small river that somehow ran through the snow at the base of the fist, and then back through the valleys that led to the gates of the overlook. Sir Jeremy blew his horn once as they approached, and the gates opened slowly, one leaf at a time, closing behind them as they rode in. Only once the doors clunked closed did Sir Jeremy seem to relax. Lock the gates, he said grimly. We keep a vigilant watch tonight, brother. There's something out there. A few did not look convinced. Ed was not one of them. He helped with dinner that night, carving a salted ham that needed quite a bit of boiling to get the salt off. But he was left with a feeling of, well, he wasn't quite sure. It was a cold night outside, that enough could be seen through the crystal windows. A white mist was rising on the fist of the first men. He went to bed with that feeling, and he wasn't surprised to be woken when it was still dark. Tywin shook him awake. Sir Jeremy needs us all awake now. No lights. They did not need them. A full moon was hanging in the air, and the light was shining through the crystal windows. All the lamps were doused, and Sir Jeremy was staring out at the fist. You need to see this, brothers, Sir Jeremy said in a hoarse voice. You must all see this. Now, very curious, Ed looked through one of the windows. He could see the fist, and then he saw them, the white figures striding slowly about the fist. They seemed very white, very pale. No cloaks from what he could see. After a long moment, his mind seemed to realize what he was seeing. Wait, he muttered. Are they others? They would seem to be, Sir Jeremy muttered quietly. Look them. So cold outside now. Look at that freezing mist. Yet they wander about, without a care. Wait. And then a group of other men appeared. Well, there was no other word than shambled past the others. Ed stared in horror. Were those, he asked eventually, whites? There was a strained silence for a long moment. Sir Jeremy broke it. I think so, he muttered almost dazedly. Then he seemed to shake himself and recover his balance. Brothers, we ride for the wall tomorrow. We leave this place provisioned, but we ride because we've seen something that no brother of the Night's Watch has seen in more than 1,000 years. The enemy had indeed awoken.